Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey unlike any other. Imagine this, you're standing at the threshold of a massive wooden structure, smoke seeping through gaps in a grass-covered roof. It's February, in the year 950 somewhere in Norway. Behind that heavy door lives an entire world, 30 people, 3 generations, their animals, their secrets, and their fight to survive one more winter. For the next year, you and I are going to live with them. We're going to eat what they eat, fear what they fear, and celebrate what they celebrate. This is not a story about Viking raids or glory. This is about something far more intimate. What happened when the warriors came home, when the doors closed, and when winter refused to let go? Are you ready to step inside? Before we journey into the Longhouse together, I want to ask you something. If you're curious about what life truly was like before modern comfort, if you want to experience history in a way that feels real and raw, then please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Do it when you feel that spark of curiosity, when something I share makes you think differently. And I'm genuinely curious, where are you watching this from right now? Are you in bed trying to wind down on a commute? Maybe you're just searching for something deeper than surface level history. Drop a comment and let me know. Now dim those lights if you can. Maybe turn on a fan for that gentle white noise. Let's make this moment feel like we're sitting by that ancient fire together. Let's begin. It's late February, maybe early March, the Vikings called this month. Goa, named after a winter spirit who refused to release her grip on the land. Picture the landscape, endless white stretching in every direction, broken only by dark forests and the occasional plume of smoke rising from beneath the snow. That smoke, it's coming from a longhouse. Our longhouse. From the outside it looks almost alive. The walls curve outward in the middle, making the whole structure look like a massive wooden ship that's been flipped upside down and buried halfway into the earth. And that's not an accident. These people spent their lives building ships. When it came time to create shelter, they used the same design, a design that had kept them alive on raging seas for generations. Why wouldn't it work on land? The dimensions are staggering. This particular longhouse is about 20 meters long, roughly 65 feet and 7 meters wide. Not huge by modern standards, but when you consider that 30 to 50 people are living inside this space along with their most valuable animals, well, suddenly it feels a lot smaller. The largest longhouse ever excavated was found in Lofoten, Norway. That monster was 67 meters long and 10 meters wide. Can you imagine? That's longer than half a football field all under one roof. The walls are made of vertical wooden planks chinked with moss and clay to keep out the wind. But here's the thing, those walls aren't holding up the roof. Inside, 2 rows of massive support posts run the entire length of the building, and those posts carry the weight of everything above. This means the walls can bow outward, giving more space inside without risking collapse. It's brilliant engineering, honestly. No windows, not a single one. Light comes from the central fire, and whatever dim glow manages to seep through gaps in the turf roof above. Let me take you inside. You push open the heavy wooden door, and the first thing that hits you is not what you see, it's what you smell. Smoke, thick and acrid, hangs in the air like an invisible blanket. It never leaves, ever. Your eyes start to water immediately. There's the smell of unwashed bodies, people who haven't bathed in weeks, maybe months. There's the scent of wet wool of animal dung from the goats and sheep huddled at the far end of the building. There's fermented fish, sour butter, and something else, something ancient and earthy that you can't quite place. Your eyes adjust slowly. And I mean slowly. There's a saga, the Grettis Saga, chapter 28 to be exact, that tells the story of a man named Udin, who walked into a dim longhouse from the bright snow outside. He literally could not see another man standing right in front of him. That man Greta intentionally tripped him as a joke. That's how dark it was inside these places. Scholars who have recreated these longhouses report the same thing. Coming in from daylight, you're practically blind for several minutes. But let's say your eyes adjust. What do you see? Down the centre of the longhouse runs a corridor, maybe 4 feet wide. On either side of this corridor are raised platforms, benches really built right into the walls. These benches are about 2 feet high and maybe 6 feet deep. This is where people sit. This is where they work, and this is where they sleep. No beds, no separate bedrooms, just these hard wooden benches covered with straw, maybe some sheepskins if you're lucky. 30 people sharing this space. 3 generations, grandparents, parents, children, maybe some cousins, a couple of thralls, that's the Viking word for slaves, and anyone else who's earned a spot by the fire. In the very centre of the longhouse, right down that main corridor, is the fire pit. It's not a fireplace, there's no chimney, it's just a shallow rectangular pit lined with flat stones, and inside it a fire burns constantly. Day and night, winter and summer. This fire is everything. It's heat, it's light, it's the stove, it's the social centre, it's the altar. Let it go out and you're risking death. The smoke from this fire rises up and some of it escapes through a hole in the roof. Some of it. The rest just hangs there, creating this permanent haze that stings your eyes and coats the inside of your lungs. Archaeological studies of Viking remains show high rates of lung disease, especially in women and children who spent more time indoors. This smoke was slowly killing them. But what choice did they have, freeze or suffocate? Those were the options. Now it's late February, so we're at the tail end of winter. The worst part, actually. The coldest month. Thori, which ran from mid-January to mid-February, just ended. But Goa is almost as brutal. This is the month people call the lone month of cold weather, because it's the last one before spring, but it feels endless. The food stores are running critically low. The excitement of Yule, the 12-night winter festival that happened back in late December, is long gone. The men who left on their ships last summer have mostly returned, so the longhouse is packed again. Tight, tense, everyone's ready for this winter to end. Let me paint you a specific picture. Over on the eastern bench closest to the fire sits the head of the household. We'll call him Bjorn. He's maybe 45 years old, which makes him ancient by Viking standards. Most men didn't live past 50. Bjorn occupies what's called the high seat, the Ondvegi in Old Norse. This is the most honourable position in the house. It's framed by 2 massive posts called the high seat pillars, the Ondvegisulur. When the early Vikings settled Iceland, some of them threw these pillars overboard as they approached land, letting the gods decide where they should settle based on where the pillars washed ashore. That's how sacred these posts were. Archaeologists have found tiny sheets of embossed gold foil buried beneath the high seat pillars at excavation sites. Offerings to the gods, placed there when the house was built, probably to ensure prosperity and protection. Bjorn's great-grandfather put them there, and Bjorn's grandfather told him the story, and Bjorn will tell his grandson when the time comes. That's how memory works. When you don't have writing, you carry it in your bones. Bjorn's wife Astrid sits to his left. She's younger, maybe 35, but she looks older. Life here ages you. She's weaving, her hands moving almost unconsciously as she feeds wool through the loom. She's been doing this since she was a child. Muscle memory. Her fingers are scarred and calloused, her back slightly hunched from decades of bending over work. But her eyes are sharp. She misses nothing. She knows exactly how much salted fish is left in the storage room. She knows which goat is pregnant and which one needs to be slaughtered soon. She knows that her youngest son has been coughing for 3 days and might not make it to spring. She doesn't say it out loud, but she knows. Clustered around them are their children, 4 survive to adulthood out of the 8 Astrid bore. There's Leif, the eldest son, 20 years old, already thinking about when he'll inherit this place. There's Sigrid, 17, who'll be married off to a neighbouring farm within the year to strengthen an alliance. There's young Knut, 12, and little Ragnhild, just 7, who's currently asleep on the bench curled against her grandmother like a cat. The grandmother Bjorn's mother, Helga, is a fixture here. She's maybe 60, which makes her a genuine marvel. She's survived childbirth, disease, famine, and the sheer grinding brutality of Viking life. She's blind in one eye from an infection years ago, but she can still thread a needle better than anyone else in the house. She sits closest to the fire because age earned you that privilege, and she's telling a story to anyone who'll listen. Something about Thor and a giant. The children have heard it 100 times, but they never get tired of it. Further down the benches, closer to the shadows, are the thralls. 2 of them, a man and a woman, both maybe 25, both taken as slaves during a raid 5 years ago. They're from somewhere south, maybe England, maybe Ireland. They don't speak much Norse, but they understand enough. They sleep at the far end of the longhouse near the animals in a space that's barely warmer than outside. They eat the scraps. They do the worst jobs cleaning out the animal stalls, hauling water in the freezing cold, processing the slaughter. They have no names here, not really. Just thrall. Property. This is the reality of the longhouse. It's a hierarchy, clear and brutal. But here's the strange thing, everyone's survival depends on everyone else. Bjorn might own this place, but if Astrid doesn't manage the food stores correctly, they all starve. If the thralls don't work, the farm collapses. If Helga doesn't pass down her knowledge of which plants heal and which ones kill, people die. It's a web of dependence disguised as domination. And the space god the space, or rather the lack of it. Imagine trying to have a private conversation here. Imagine trying to argue with your spouse, or cry, or make love, or grieve. You can't. Everyone hears everything. Everyone sees everything. Your shame is public. Your joy is communal. Your grief is shared whether you want it to be or not. There's a kind of brutal intimacy to it that we've completely lost in the modern world. We have our separate bedrooms, our closed doors, our headphones and screens. We've built walls between ourselves and the people we live with. But here in this longhouse in the year 950 privacy doesn't exist, and in some ways that closeness creates deep bonds. But in other ways it creates resentment so thick you could cut it with a blade. By late February, after 6 months of winter, that resentment is peaking. People are snapping at each other over nothing. Someone left the door open too long and let in cold air. Someone took more than their share of the evening meal. Someone's child is crying again, keeping everyone awake. The tension is unbearable, and yet they endure. Because they have to. Because spring is coming. It has to be. As the fire crackles and shifts, casting dancing shadows on the curved wooden walls, you realize something profound. This building, this smoky, crowded, smelly longhouse is the entire world for these people during winter. Its safety, its family, its culture, its religion, its economy, everything happens here. Birth, death, work, rest, celebration. Mourning, all under one roof. The Vikings are famous for their raids, their ships, their explorations. But this is where they actually lived. This is where they became who they were. Not on a longship cutting through ocean waves, but here in the dim smoke on the hard benches next to people they loved and people they could barely stand, all fighting together to survive one more winter. And we're just getting started. Because in a few weeks the first signs of spring will appear, the ice will begin to crack, the women will start pushing the men out the door, desperate for space after months of confinement. The land will wake up hungry, and so will the people. But tonight in Goa, the winter spirit's month, they wait. They tend the fire. They tell stories. They ration the last of the smoked fish and the hard bread and the sour butter. They dream of green things growing. And tomorrow, well, not tomorrow exactly, but soon we'll see what happens when winter finally releases its grip and the real work of survival begins. Stay with me. We have 11 more months to go. The fire needs feeding again. It's Knut's job tonight, the 12-year-old boy we met earlier. He's learned to move quietly in the dark, feeling his way along the bench to the woodpile without waking the sleepers. But here's the problem: the woodpile is getting low, dangerously low, and it's still weeks before the snow melts enough to gather more from the forest. This is the reality of Einmanudur, the lone month, the last stretch of cold weather before spring arrives. The Vikings counted their age not in years but in winters survived. And this month, this is when you find out if you've calculated correctly. If you've stored enough food, if you've cut enough wood, if you've been smart enough, careful enough, lucky enough to make it through. Because if you haven't, well, there's no grocery store down the road. There's no calling for help. There's just you, your family, the supplies you put away 6 months ago, and the slow creeping realization that you might have made a fatal mistake. Let me show you how Viking food preservation actually worked. Because this is what kept people alive, or didn't. It's early March now, maybe 3 weeks have passed since we first stepped into this longhouse. The festival of Yule is a distant memory. The excitement of the men returning from their summer raids has faded. Now there's just the grind of waiting for spring, while the food stores dwindle day by day. In the storage room at the far end of the longhouse, really just a partitioned section with some wooden bins and hanging racks. Astrid does her daily inventory. She's been doing this every morning for weeks, and every morning the numbers get worse. There are 3 barrels of stockfish left. Stockfish. Let me tell you about this stuff because it's both brilliant and disgusting. The Vikings would take cod, tons and tons of cod from the North Atlantic, and they'd gut it, sometimes behead it, and then hang it on a massive outdoor wooden racks to dry in the cold air. No salt required. The freezing temperatures and constant wind would pull every bit of moisture out of the fish until it became hard as a wooden board. Literally. You could build a house with the dried stockfish, and it would probably hold up. This process created a food that could last for years. Years. You could pack it on a ship sail to Constantinople, trade it there, sail back, and it would still be good. The only problem, you had to soak it for days, sometimes a week, to rehydrate it before you could eat it. And even then it tasted like wood that used to be fish. But it was protein, it was calories. It kept you alive. 3 barrels left. Astrid knows each barrel holds enough fish for maybe 2 weeks if they are careful, so that's 6 weeks of fish protein remaining. They're currently in week 24 of winter. Spring should arrive in week 26 or 27. Should, but what if it's late? Next, she checks the dried meat. This hangs from the rafters above in the smokiest part of the longhouse. And here's something clever. The smoke from the fire wasn't just an annoying byproduct. It was a preservation tool. Meat hung up there in that constant smoke would last months longer than meat stored anywhere else. The smoke compounds acted as an antibacterial agent and the heat kept it dry. Double benefit. But smoking alone wasn't enough. Most of this meat had also been salted, and salt was expensive, separately expensive. In Norway and Sweden and Denmark, they had to evaporate seawater to get salt, which was labour-intensive and time-consuming. Some salt came through trade from the Baltic regions, but it cost dearly. In Iceland, salt was essentially non-existent. The Icelandic Vikings had to get creative. They used something called sour whey. Stay with me here because this is fascinating. When you make cheese, you separate the curds from the whey, that watery liquid that's left over. If you let that whey ferment, the lactobacillus bacteria convert the milk sugars into lactic acid. That acid creates an environment where harmful bacteria can't survive. So you could pack meat into barrels of this sour whey, and it would preserve for months. It would taste incredibly sour, but it wouldn't kill you. That's a win. Astrid counts the remaining meat. Not much, maybe enough for 1 meal per week for the next month. That's it. The big slaughter happened back in Gormanudur, the slaughter month in October and November. That's when they made the brutal calculations which animals could they feed through winter and which ones had to die now to become food. They killed the weak ones, the old ones, the ones that ate more than they were worth. They saved only the breeding stock and the strong young animals. But here's the thing about that slaughter month, it wasn't just practical, it was emotional torture. These weren't faceless livestock, these were animals they'd raised from birth. The children had named them. They'd fed them by hand when they were sick. And then one cold November morning they had to slit their throats and drain their blood into wooden buckets because survival demanded it. Leif Bjorn's eldest son still remembers the goat he had to kill. Her name was Aska. She'd been born the same spring he was. 20 years they'd lived on the same farm, and he had to hold her head while his father used the knife because they needed the meat and couldn't afford to keep feeding her through another winter. He didn't cry Viking, men didn't cry, not in front of others, but he didn't eat goat meat for a week after that. The Vikings used everything from those slaughtered animals. Everything. The meat was dried, smoked, salted, or packed in sour whey. The blood was mixed with fat and grain to make blood sausages. The intestines became sausage casings. The bones were boiled for broth, then carved into tools or game pieces. The hides became leather. The sinews became thread. Even the hooves were boiled down for glue. Nothing wasted, because waste meant death. Astrid moves to the butter crock. Butter was another staple, but butter goes rancid quickly unless you preserve it. The solution let it ferment. The Vikings would pack butter into wooden boxes or barrels and let it turn sour. Fermented butter tastes awful by modern standards, incredibly sour and pungent, but it lasts, and fat is calories. In the harsh Norse winter, calories are survival. She scoops out a portion for the day, not much left here either. Then there are the root vegetables. Turnips, carrots, onions buried in sand in a cool dark corner of the storage area. These could last months if kept properly, but you had to check them constantly. One rotten turnip could spread mould to the whole batch. Astrid finds 2 that have gone soft and tosses them to the side. The pigs can have them. Waste not. And finally the grain. Barley, oats, a little rye. This is the foundation of the Viking diet, though modern people obsessed with Viking diets seem to forget that. The historical Viking diet wasn't low carb. It was heavily based on grain, barley, porridge, oat bread, barley beer. Grain was calories and calories were life, but grain has problems. It can get damp and mouldy. Rats and mice can get into it. So the Vikings developed a clever solution. They'd bake hard bread almost like crackers and then hang it on poles or strings right above the hearth fire. The heat and smoke kept it dry and kept the insects away. When you wanted to eat it, you'd soak it in soup or beer to soften it up. Not delicious, but it worked. Astrid does the math in her head. Grain stores are okay. Not great, but okay, if they're very careful. Here's the brutal truth she's calculating. They're in what the Vikings called mørsugur, which roughly translates to fat-sucking month. This ran from mid-December through mid-January, but the name tells you everything you need to know about late winter. You're sucking the last bits of fat and marrow from bones because that's all that's left. You're eating the foods you stored back in October and November, and you're praying, literally praying to the gods that spring comes on time. Because if it doesn't, if winter drags on for an extra 2 weeks, an extra month, people die, families die. Entire farmsteads can collapse. Archaeological evidence backs this up. When researchers examine Viking Age skeletons, they find seasonal patterns of malnutrition. Bones from people who died in late winter often show signs of severe nutritional stress, the body literally eating itself to stay alive. Teeth show growth arrest lines that correspond to late winter food shortages. Children were hit hardest. The infant mortality rate spiked in March and April. Have you ever had to ration food, like really ration it? Not, I'm trying to lose weight rationing, but if I eat too much today, I might not have enough to survive next week rationing. It changes you. It changes how you think about food, about sharing, about generosity. Every meal becomes a calculation. Every bite is a negotiation between your current hunger and your future survival. Astrid knows this math intimately. She knows that if she gives Knut an extra portion today because he's still growing and he's hungry, that's one less portion for someone else later. She knows that her husband Bjorn, as the head of the household, gets priority on protein because his strength matters for the heavy spring work ahead. She knows that the thralls get the smallest portions because coldly they're worth less to the farm's survival. This is Viking Age triage. This is how you make it through. But here's where it gets psychologically complex. In that same longhouse, sitting around that same fire, are people experiencing this scarcity completely differently. Bjorn in his high seat isn't hungry, not really. He's getting enough food, his children are getting enough food, even old Helga, his mother, is protected. But the thralls, they're hungry all the time, their bones are showing, their eyes have that hollow look, and they're watching Bjorn eat fish while they get thin soup and hard bread, day after day, week after week. The resentment this creates is dangerous. The Vikings knew it. That's why they kept thralls working constantly. Exhausted people are easier to control. That's why punishment for disobedience was swift and brutal. That's why thralls slept in the worst part of the longhouse next to the animals separated from the family. Can't let them feel like equals. Can't let them forget their place. But on the other hand, there's this weird interdependence. If the thralls die, who does the work, who hauls the water, cleans the stalls, processes the slaughter, gathers the firewood, the farm collapses without them. So you have to keep them alive, you have to feed them enough to work, but not enough to get strong, not enough to rebel. It's a brutal calculus. And it's not just the thralls who are suffering. Even within the family there are tensions. Young Ragnhild, the 7-year-old, doesn't understand why she can't have more porridge. She cries and her mother snaps at her, and then feels guilty, and then holds her close while she weeps quietly in the smoky darkness. Old Helga remembers winters worse than this. She survived the terrible winter of 923 when spring came 6 weeks late and half the valley starved. She lost 2 children that year. She doesn't talk about it, but she remembers, and she watches the stores dwindle with a kind of grim recognition. She's seen this before. Sigrid, the 17-year-old daughter, is promised to a young man on a neighbouring farm. The wedding is planned for late spring after the planting, but in the back of her mind she's wondering, what if his family's stores ran out? What if they're starving over there? Will the wedding still happen? Or will his family call it off because they can't afford to feed another mouth? Everything is uncertain. Everything depends on timing, on luck, on the whims of gods who may or may not be listening. Let me tell you about one specific failure in Viking food preservation, because it illustrates how fragile this system was. In the Icelandic sagas, there's a reference to a farm that lost its entire grain supply to rats one winter. Just rats. Getting into the storage room and eating the grain faster than the family could stop them. By February, the grain was gone. The family tried to survive on fish alone, but without grain for porridge and bread, they couldn't get enough calories. 3 people died before spring. The farm was abandoned. That's how thin the margin was. Or consider this mould. If your storage area got too damp, maybe the roof leaked. Maybe someone didn't seal the grain container properly. Mold could destroy everything. and eating mouldy grain could make you sick, could kill you outright, or could just weaken you enough that you couldn't fight off the next illness that came along. The Vikings weren't stupid. They knew all this. That's why they built special storage buildings separate from the main longhouse, insulated with turf built partially underground to maintain stable temperatures. That's why they checked the stores constantly. That's why they had elaborate social customs around hospitality. If your neighbour's stores failed, you were expected to share, because next year it might be you who needs help. But social obligations only go so far when everyone's running low. Back in the longhouse, evening settles in. The family gathers for the meal. Astrid ladles out portions of fish stew, rehydrated stockfish, boiled with turnips and onions thickened with a little barley. It's not delicious, but it's hot and it fills the belly. Bjorn says a few words to Thor asking for strength to endure. It's not a formal prayer. The Vikings didn't really do formal prayers like Christians. It's more like a reminder. Hey Thor, we're still here. We're still honouring you. Maybe keep the worst of the winter off our backs for a few more weeks. They eat in relative silence. The fire crackles. Someone coughs. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the door. Helga tells a short story about a winter giant who tried to steal the sun but was tricked by Loki. The children half listen, too tired and too full of fish stew to really pay attention. And in the storage room, the barrels sit a little emptier. The hanging meat looks a little more sparse. The grain bins show more bottom than top. 3 more weeks, maybe 4, until the snow melts and the earth softens enough to start spring work. 3 more weeks of eating stores that are almost gone. 3 more weeks of hoping you calculated correctly back in October when you decided which animals to kill and which to keep. 3 more weeks of Einmanuda. The lone month. The last test before spring arrives and the cycle starts all over again. And soon, very soon, we'll see what happens when that door finally opens and the whole household spills out into the fresh air, desperate for space, desperate for green things, desperate to escape the smoke and the smell and the closeness of winter. But we're not there yet. Right now we wait, we ration, we hope. The fire burns on. She's had enough. Astrid stands in the centre of the longhouse, hands on her hips, and for the first time in months, there's actual sunlight coming through the gaps in the door. Not much, just thin streams of pale light cutting through the smoke. But it's there, and it changes everything. Out, she says to Bjorn, not asking, telling. He looks up from the bench where he's been sitting for the past hour doing essentially nothing. Just sitting, taking up space, breathing her air. Out, she says again. Take Leif, take the nets, go to the river. The ice is breaking. We need fish, fresh fish, real food. Not the dried leather we've been choking down for 6 months. Bjorn knows better than to argue. Not because he's afraid of his wife, though he probably should be, but because he knows she's right. And more than that, he knows what's happening here. It's Harper, the first month of the year, the month when winter finally loosens its grip and the world remembers what green looks like. And it's the month when Viking women, after 6 months of being trapped indoors with their husbands, and sons and fathers and brothers, decide that enough is absolutely enough. Welcome to Spring Awakening, Viking style. Here's what you need to understand about the Viking calendar. They didn't count time the way we do. They didn't have January, February, March. They had 2 seasons, summer and winter. That's it. Summer was life, growth, movement, possibility. Winter was survival, darkness waiting, hoping you made it through. And the transition between them. That was Harper, named after a goddess so old, so forgotten, that we don't even really know who she was anymore. Some scholars think she was associated with spring, with renewal, with that first breath of warm air after months of cold. Others think the name comes from an old word for grasping or clutching, maybe referring to how people grasped at spring's arrival or how winter clutched at the land even as it was forced to retreat. Either way, Harper ran from mid-April to mid-May, and it was glorious. Not because the weather suddenly became warm and pleasant, this is Scandinavia we're talking about. The weather was still mostly cold, still wet, still unpredictable. But it was changing. The snow was melting into rushing streams. The ice on the rivers was breaking up with sounds like thunder. The first tiny shoots of green were pushing up through the mud. And most importantly, the door could stay open during the day. Do you have any idea what that meant to people who'd been living in a smoky, dark, crowded box for half a year? It meant freedom. It meant light. It meant air that didn't taste like burning wood and unwashed bodies. It meant space. Astrid watches as Bjorn and Leif gather their gear and head outside. She doesn't smile, but there's a visible relaxation in her shoulders the moment the door closes behind them. She turns to the thralls. You two, clean out the animal stalls, all of it. I want every bit of manure hauled outside to the fields. We'll need it for fertilizer, but I don't want to smell it in here anymore. They nod and get to work. They've learned not to hesitate. Then Astrid moves to her daughters. Sigrid, take Ragnhild. Go to the edges of the forest. Look for early greens, chickweed, dandelion shoots, wild onions, anything that's pushing up. We need fresh vegetables. Our blood's probably thick as porridge after a winter of salt fish and grain. And she's not wrong. The Viking diet in winter was heavy, starchy, preserved. Salt smoke fermentation, these kept you alive, but they didn't keep you healthy. By late winter, people were dealing with scurvy symptoms, though they didn't know to call it that. Bleeding gums, loose teeth fatigue that went beyond normal tiredness. The body was screaming for fresh vegetables, for vitamin C, for something green and alive. The moment those first spring greens appeared, Viking women were out foraging like their lives depended on it, because they did. Sigrid takes little Ragnhild by the hand, and they head out into the pale spring sunlight. The child is almost giddy. She's 7 years old, and she barely remembers the last time she was outside for more than a few desperate minutes. The light is so bright it hurts her eyes. The space is dizzying. No walls, no roof, just open sky stretching forever. Stay close, Sigrid warns, but she's smiling. She's 17 and she's been engaged to Halvard from the neighbouring farm since autumn. The wedding is planned for late spring after the planting is done. She hasn't seen him since November, 5 months. She wonders if he still looks the same. She wonders if he thinks about her the way she thinks about him. Probably not, she decides. Boys are useless at that sort of thing. But right now she's not thinking about Halvard. She's thinking about how good it feels to walk without bumping into someone, to breathe without inhaling smoke, to hear something other than snoring and coughing and the crackle of the fire. They find chickweed first, poking up through the wet ground near a fallen log. Sigrid shows Ragnhild how to pinch off just the tender tops, leaving the roots to grow more. Take only what we need, she says, echoing what her mother taught her and her grandmother before that. The land gives, but it doesn't give forever if you're greedy. Back at the Longhouse, something remarkable is happening. With most of the men gone and the children outside, Astrid and old Helga have the place almost to themselves. And for the first time in months they can actually talk, not whisper, not communicate in the shorthand of glances and gestures they have developed over a winter of no privacy. Actually talk. How bad were the stores? Helga asks, working on mending a torn fishing net. Bad, Astrid admits. Another week and we would have been in trouble. Real trouble. Helga nods. She knows. She's lived through worse. The winter of 923, she says, and Astrid knows the story. Everyone knows the story. The year spring came 6 weeks late. The year half the valley starved. Helga lost 2 children that year, a daughter, to fever, a son to simple starvation. They ran out of food and there was nothing to do but watch him fade. But Helga doesn't dwell on it. Vikings didn't have therapy or grief counselling or support groups. They had work, they had survival. They had the next season to prepare for. Grief was something you carried, but you carried it while moving forward. Always forward. We made it, Astrid says. That's what matters. We made it, Helga agrees. Now let me tell you about the psychological phenomenon that was happening here, because it's fascinating and it's something we've completely lost in the modern world. These people had just spent 6 to 8 months living in extreme proximity, 30 to 50 people sharing a space smaller than most modern suburban living rooms. No doors, no walls, no headphones, no escape. Every argument was public. Every moment of weakness was witnessed. Every bit of tension had nowhere to go but inward, building and building and building until the whole household felt like a pot about to boil over. Modern psychologists have a term for this cabin fever. It's that restless, irritable, sometimes violent state that comes from being isolated in a confined space for too long. We see it in research stations in Antarctica. We see it in submarines. We see it in space stations. People start to crack. They get irritable over tiny things. They form grudges. They need space so desperately that the lack of it becomes almost physically painful. Now imagine cabin fever, but you can't leave. You can't quit and go home. You can't request a transfer. You're stuck there in that smoke-filled box with people you love but also maybe can't stand right now, and the only thing that will end it is time. Just time, waiting for the season to change. The Vikings understood this intimately. They didn't have the vocabulary we have, but they knew the pattern. They knew that by late winter households were powder kegs. That's why the sagas are full of stories about feuds that erupted in late winter, about insults spoken that couldn't be taken back, about violence that exploded over the smallest provocation, and they knew the solution: separation. Space. Get the men out of the house. There's a reason the Viking raiding season was summer. Yes, the seas were calmer and the weather was better for sailing, but also the men needed to leave. They needed adventure, purpose, distance, and the women needed them gone. This wasn't about not loving each other. Viking marriages could be deep partnerships built on genuine affection and respect. But love doesn't mean you can share 200 square feet with someone for 6 months and not want to scream. So in Harper, the women would quite literally push the men out the door. Go hunting, go fishing, go check the traps, go repair the fences, go do literally anything that's not sitting by the fire taking up space and breathing our air. And the men would go gladly, because they'd been going stir-crazy too. Bjorn and Leif are down at the river now testing the ice. The main channel is still frozen, but the edges are breaking up, creating pools of open water where the current runs fastest. This is where the fish will be hungry after winter, moving into the shallows, easier to catch. Leif lowers a net into one of these pools. The water is so cold it makes his hands ache within seconds, but he doesn't care. He's outside. There's sky above him instead of a smoke-stained roof. There's wind on his face. There's space to move, to breathe, to think his own thoughts without someone else's voice interrupting. Your mother seems particularly motivated to have us gone today, Bjorn says, and there's humour in his voice. Leif grins. Can you blame her? I was ready to punch Knut last week for the way he chews. I can't imagine what it's been like for her managing all of us. They work in comfortable silence for a while. The net fills slowly with small fish. Nothing impressive, but fresh. The first fresh fish in months. How are you feeling about the wedding? Bjorn asks eventually. Leif looks up surprised. They don't usually talk about this kind of thing. Sigrid's wedding. Yours. Oh, right. Leif is 20 years old. In Viking society, that's past the usual marrying age for men. The family's been negotiating with another farm about a match a girl named Thora 16's strong good breeding stock. The wedding would probably happen next spring, giving them time to build an addition to the longhouse or maybe a separate small house on the property. I suppose I'm ready, Leif says carefully. I mean, I've met her twice. She seems capable. Bjorn laughs. Capable. High praise. You know what I mean? She's not going to fall apart when things get hard. She'll work. She understands what needs doing. And that was really what mattered in a Viking marriage. Love was nice if it happened, but it wasn't required. What was required was partnership. Could you run a farm together? Could you survive winters together? Could you raise children who wouldn't die before reaching adulthood? Could you work as a team when everything was falling apart? Romance in the modern sense was a luxury. Survival was the priority. They pull in the net, maybe 20 fish. Small ones, but it's a start. Your mother will be pleased, Bjorn says. Your wife will be pleased, Leif corrects, and they both smile. Meanwhile, back at the longhouse, Astrid is conducting what amounts to a spring purge. Every piece of straw bedding that's gotten mouldy or infested with fleas gets pulled out and hauled outside. Every corner gets swept. The thralls are scrubbing the benches with sand and water. The whole place is being aired out. There's a practicality to this, of course. Cleanliness meant fewer diseases, fewer parasites, better health. But there's also something almost ritualistic about it. Washing away a winter, making space for the new season, creating separation between what was and what's coming. Sigrid and Ragnhild return with baskets of spring greens. Not much, the growing season has barely started, but enough for a fresh salad to go with tonight's meal. The first greens after 6 months of dried preserved food. Astrid tastes a dandelion leaf and nearly weeps. The bitterness, the freshness, the green alive taste of it. This is what she's been craving without quite knowing it. Helga, she calls, come taste spring. The old woman shuffles over and takes a leaf. She chews slowly, thoughtfully. Another winter survived, she says quietly. The land remembers. We remember. The cycle continues. And that's the thing about Viking life that's so different from ours. They were connected to these cycles in a way we can barely imagine. They knew bone deep that everything moved in circles. Summer to winter to summer again. Planting to harvest to planting again. Birth to death to birth again. The gods themselves were part of this Odin hanging on the world tree for 9 nights, dying and being reborn with wisdom. Baldur dying and waiting in hell until Ragnarok and the world's renewal. They didn't fight the cycles, they moved with them. And when winter finally broke and spring arrived, they didn't take it for granted. They celebrated it, worked with it, honoured it. As the sun begins to set later now, noticeably later than it did in February, the family gathers again. Bjorn and Leif return with their fish. Sigrid proudly displays the greens. The thralls have the longhouse cleaner than it's been in months. Even the air smells different, less smoke, more possibility. The meal tonight is simple but feels like a feast. Fresh fish barely cooked, still tender. Wild greens bitter and bright. Barley porridge, but somehow it tastes better knowing that winter is behind them. Bjorn raises his cup of ale. To spring, to survival, to the land waking up and remembering we're still here. They drink, they eat, and for the first time in months there's actual laughter in the longhouse. Not forced, not desperate, just genuine relief and joy. Ragnhild falls asleep with a smile on her face, her belly full of fresh fish. Helga sits by the fire watching the family and allows herself a small moment of pride. Another generation taught. Another winter survived. The knowledge passed down. and Astrid, standing in the doorway before closing it for the night, looks out at the darkening sky and allows herself to hope. Hope that the planting will go well, hope that Sigrid's wedding will be joyful, hope that next winter's stores will be better, hope that this family, this household, this small corner of survival in a harsh world will continue. The door closes, the fire burns low. Outside the world is waking up, and soon, very soon, the real work begins. The planting, the building, the preparing. The men will start thinking about summer voyages, about trading, about raiding. The women will be managing the farm, the livestock, the endless cycle of work that keeps everyone alive. But tonight they rest. They made it through. Spring is here, the cycle turns. The ground is finally soft enough. Bjorn kneels down and pushes his fingers into the earth, dark, wet, cold, but no longer frozen solid. He can feel it giving way beneath his hand. This is the moment they have been waiting for. The earth has woken up. The planting can begin. It's Skerpla now, late May, early June, and every single person on this farm, from old Helga down to little Ragnhild, is about to work harder than they've worked all year. 'Cause here's the thing about Viking agriculture that nobody talks about. You had maybe 6 weeks to get everything in the ground. 6 weeks between when the earth thawed enough to plant and when the growing season was too far gone to matter. Miss that window. You don't eat next winter. It's that simple. This is where the entire year succeeds or fails. Right here, right now, in the dirt. Let me take you through what planting season actually looked like, because it's nothing like the romanticized version you might imagine. This wasn't peaceful farmers gently scattering seeds while birds sang. This was brutal, back-breaking labour done at a pace that would make modern workers weep. And everyone, absolutely everyone, had a role to play. The thralls are up before dawn. Their job is the hardest and the most crucial, breaking the fields. Remember, the Vikings didn't have tractors or even proper ploughs in the way we think of them. What they had was a simple wooden tool, basically a pointed stick, reinforced with iron, dragged behind an ox, or sometimes just pulled by human muscle. The male thrall, let's call him Einar, because even though he's lost his freedom, he hasn't lost his name, is hitched to the yard along with the farm's ox. Yes, hitched, like an animal, because that's how they viewed him. The ox pulls from the front, Einar pulls from the side, and together they drag this tool through the earth, creating shallow furrows. It's exhausting work. The kind of work that destroys your back, your shoulders, your legs. By midday, Einar's hands are bleeding through the cloth he's wrapped around them. The ox is frothing at the mouth, but they can't stop. The field has to be ready. Behind them comes the female thrall, we'll call her Signa. Her job is to follow the furrows with a wooden rake, breaking up the larger clods of earth, making sure the soil is fine enough for seeds to take root. She's been doing this since sunrise and she'll do it until sunset. Her back screams. Her hands are raw. But if she slows down, she'll be beaten, so she doesn't slow down. Here's something that's going to make you uncomfortable. This system worked because it was cruel. The Vikings needed maximum productivity during the short growing season, and the way they achieved that was through enslaving people and working them literally to the edge of death. Thralls made up somewhere between 10 and 20% of the Viking population. That's not a small number. That's millions of people over the centuries who lived and died in bondage so that their masters could survive. We like to think of the Vikings as these noble warriors, these explorers, these craftsmen, and they were those things. But they were also slavers. They raided coastal villages specifically to capture people to work their farms. The word thrall itself is where we get the English word enthrall, to hold someone in bondage, to enslave them. It's an uncomfortable truth, but it's the truth. Meanwhile, Bjorn and Leif are working a different section of the field, sowing the barley. Barley was the single most important crop for Vikings. It grew well in the cold climate, matured quickly, and could be used for everything: bread, porridge, and most importantly beer. A Viking farm without barley was a farm that wouldn't survive. The technique is simple but requires skill. Bjorn walks down the furrows with the leather bag of seeds slung across his chest. He reaches in, grabs a handful, and broadcasts it across the earth with a practiced motion, not too dense, not too sparse, just right. Too many seeds in one spot and they'll compete with each other and all's die. Too few and you're wasting precious growing space. Behind him, Leif follows with a branch, lightly dragging it over the scattered seeds to cover them with soil. Not buried deep barley seeds need to be close to the surface, but covered enough that birds won't eat them all. They work in rhythm, father and son, hour after hour. Bjorn's back hurts. His knees hurt. His shoulders hurt. He's 45 years old and he feels ancient, but he doesn't complain. This is what men do. This is what survival looks like. Have you ever done manual farm labour? Real farm labour, not the weekend gardening kind. It's mind-numbing and physically brutal in equal measure. The same motion repeated thousands of times. Your brain goes somewhere else just to cope with the monotony. You think about other things, past summers, upcoming voyages, the daughter's wedding, the son's future, anything to distract from the endless repetition of reach, throw, step, reach, throw, step. In another section of the field, Astrid and Sigrid are planting the vegetables. Onions mostly, they grow well and store even better. Some turnips, some carrots if they're lucky. They work on their knees, moving down the rows, pushing each small plant into the earth with their fingers, packing the soil around it. Sigrid's hands are caked with mud. Her knees are soaked through. Her back aches from bending. And she's thinking about her wedding. It's happening in 3 weeks. 3 weeks from now, she'll leave this farm and move to Halvard's family farm about an hour's walk from here. She'll become part of his household work, his family's fields, bear his children if the gods allow. She's excited and terrified in equal measure. "Mama," she says quietly, "what if I can't do it?" Astrid doesn't look up from her planting. Can't do what? All of it. Running household, managing stores, keeping everyone alive through winter. What if I fail? Now, Astrid does look up. There's dirt on her face and grey in her hair and lines around her eyes from squinting against the sun for 40 years. She looks at her daughter, still so young, still so uncertain, and she feels her heart clench. "You'll fail sometimes," Astrid says. "Everyone does. The winter I was 22, I miscalculated the grain stores and we nearly starved in March. Your grandfather had to loan us food and I felt the shame of that for years." Sigrid looks shocked. She's never heard this story. "But you know what?" Astrid continues. "I learned. The next year I stored extra. I never made that mistake again. Failure teaches you if you let it. And you're smarter than I was at your age. You'll be fine." "How do you know?" "Because I raised you. Because I've watched you work. Because you ask questions like this, which means you're thinking ahead. The ones who fail are the ones who never think they can fail. You're already better than that." They go back to planting, but Sigrid's shoulders sit a little straighter. Sometimes that's all you need, someone to tell you that fear is normal, that doubt is human, that everyone struggles. Now let's talk about what happened when the planting was done, because this is where things get really interesting. The festival of Ostara was held right after the spring equinox, marking the official beginning of summer in the Viking calendar. Summer, remember, not spring. The Vikings only had 2 seasons, and summer started the day after the equinox. But there was another celebration coming up in late May, early June, right around this time. Valpergus, also called May Eve. This festival was dedicated to the twins Freya and Freyja, the god and goddess of fertility, prosperity, and frankly sex. This was the festival where Vikings celebrated the promise of fertile fields, abundant harvests, and yes, fertile marriages. It was huge in Sweden especially, but celebrated across the Viking world in various forms. Picture this: the planting is done, the back-breaking work is over at least for now, the seeds are in the ground, and all you can do is wait and hope the gods bless your fields with rain and sun in the right proportions. You can't control it. You can only hope. So what do? You celebrate. You honor the gods who control these things. You feast, you drink, you dance, you make offerings. And you definitely don't sit around worrying, because worrying won't make the barley grow any faster. The whole community comes together for Valpergus Nacht. Not just Bjorn's farm, but all the neighbouring farms, maybe 30 or 40 households, 200 people gathered in a meadow near the river. They've built a massive bonfire, and I mean massive, 20 feet high, crackling and roaring, visible for miles. There's food, of course. Everyone brings what they can spare: smoked fish, fresh venison from a recent hunt, the last of the winter butter, early spring greens, flatbread and barrels of ale. So much ale. The Vikings took their beer seriously. Barley beer, oat beer, honey mead, anything fermented and alcoholic was welcome at a festival. The younger men are showing off naturally. There's a wrestling competition happening near the fire, and Leif is right in the middle of it. He's 20 years old, strong from a winter of fishing and a spring of farm work, and he's determined to prove himself in front of the whole community. His opponent is a guy named Thorstein from the next farm over, maybe 22, built like an ox. They circle each other, gripping, grunting, trying to throw each other down. The crowd cheers, bets are being made. Someone's already drunk and shouting advice that makes no sense. Leif gets Thorstein in a hold and nearly throws him, but Thorstein twists at the last second and they both go down in a tangle of limbs. The crowd roars with laughter. They get up grinning, covered in grass stains and dirt, and go again. This is what community looked like for Vikings. Yes, they competed. Yes, there were rivalries and feuds and old grudges. But there was also this shared celebration, shared joy, shared relief that another planting season was done, and maybe, just maybe, they'd all survive another year. Over by the fire, the women are conducting their own rituals. This is where Astrid's role becomes really interesting, because Viking women held genuine religious power in ways that might surprise you. There's a vulva here, a seeress, a woman who practices Cedar, the Norse form of shamanic magic. She's old, maybe 70, dressed in layers of cloaks and carrying a staff. People respect her and fear her in equal measure. She can see the future, or so she claims. She can speak to the spirits. She can bless the fields or curse them. The vulva walks through the planted fields chanting in a language that's half Old Norse and half something older, something that predates even the Viking Age. She's asking the land spirits, the landvetir, to bless the crops. She's asking Freyja to make the earth fertile. She's performing a ritual that's been performed in these fields for centuries, maybe millennia. Astrid watches, respectful but not awed. She's seen vulvas before. Some of them are genuinely gifted. Some of them are frauds who have learned to put on a good show. Either way, it doesn't hurt to have the blessings. The gods might not be real, though you'd never say that out loud, but the community belief in them is very real, and that belief has power. Little Ragnhild is running wild with the other children, playing some game that involves a lot of shrieking and running in circles. She's covered in dirt and grass stains and probably won't sleep for hours after this. But Astrid lets her. Childhood is short in the Viking world. Let the girl have her joy while she can. Sigrid is off somewhere with Halvard. They are supposed to be chaperoned, but somehow they've managed to slip away from the main crowd. They're sitting by the river, talking quietly, holding hands in that tentative way of young couples who are still figuring out this whole marriage thing. "Are you nervous?" Halvard asks. He's 19, tall and skinny, with hair that sticks up in odd directions no matter what he does with it. "Terrified," Sigrid admits. "You absolutely terrified, he says, and they both laugh, and somehow that shared fear makes it better. As the night deepens and the fire burns lower, the tone of the festival shifts. The children are herded off to bed by their mothers. The drinking intensifies. The dancing gets wilder, more suggestive. This is Frasia's night, after all, goddess of love and desire and all things passionate. Some couples slip away into the darkness. Some are married, some are not. The Vikings had a complicated relationship with sexuality. They valued marriage and legitimate heirs, but they also understood that humans are human and nature has its way. Babies born 9 months after Valpergus were common enough that nobody was surprised. Bjorn and Astrid sit together by the fire watching the festivities. They have been married for 23 years. They know each other's bodies better than they know their own. Their passion has faded into something steadier, more reliable partnership, companionship, shared exhaustion. Think the crops will take? Bjorn asks. They'll take or they won't, Astrid says. We've done our part, now it's up to the gods and the weather. Always comes down to that, doesn't it? Always has, always will. They sit in comfortable seats watching their community celebrate, watching their children grow, watching another cycle begin, seeds in the ground, hope in the air, the endless turning of the seasons, because that's what Viking life really was. Not the raids, not the glory, not the sagas. It was this planting seeds and hoping they'd grow, raising children and hoping they'd survive, making it through one more winter and then doing it all again. The festival winds down as dawn approaches. People stumble back to their farms drunk and happy and exhausted. The bonfire collapses into embers. The vulva disappears into the forest, her work done. And back at the Longhouse as Bjorn and his family settle in for a few hours of sleep before the day's work begins again. There's a feeling of quiet satisfaction. The seeds are planted. The gods have been honoured. The community is strong. Now comes the waiting, the watching, the hoping that the rains come but not too much, that the sun shines but not too fierce, that the balance holds. And soon, very soon, we'll see what happens when the men leave again, when the long ships are prepared and the summer raiding season begins. When the women take full control of the farm and the real test of their management skills begins. But that's next. Right now, there's just the satisfaction of work completed, the warmth of community, and the quiet prayer that this year's harvest will be enough. The cycle continues. It always does. Astrid wakes to an empty bed. It's still dark, that strange half-dark of Solmanudur, the sun month, when night barely exists this far north. She reaches across the sleeping bench and finds only wool blankets still slightly warm where Bjorn was lying an hour ago. She knows what this means, she's known it was coming. But knowing doesn't make it easier. She gets up, wraps a cloak around her shoulders, and steps outside. The sky is that pale grey blue of dawn, though it's maybe 3 a.m. This is the brightest month of the year, the month so bright they had to add 4 extra days to it just to make the calendar work. June and July, when the sun barely sets, when you can read at midnight without a lamp, when the world feels turned inside out from the endless dark of winter. Down by the shore, maybe a quarter-mile from the Longhouse, she can see them. Shadows moving against the lighter sky. Men loading a ship. Bjorn and Leif are leaving. They're not alone. Every able-bodied man from the neighbouring farms is gathering at the beach, maybe 25 of them total. They've been planning this for weeks. A trading voyage, they're calling it. Sailing south to the Frisian coast, maybe crossing over to England if the winds are good. Trading furs and amber and slaves, yes, slaves people captured in raids further east for silver spices, wine, fine cloth. Trading. Right. Astrid knows how these voyages work. They start as trading and end as raiding, depending on what opportunities present themselves. A merchant ship sailing alone, an undefended monastery, a coastal village that looks prosperous. The line between trader and raider was never very clear for Vikings. It shifted based on circumstance, opportunity, and how desperately you needed to come home with something to show for months at sea. She walks down to the beach. The air is cool but not cold, carrying the smell of salt and seaweed and tar from the ship's hull. The longship is already half-loaded barrels of provisioned furs packed in leather weapons, wrapped in oiled cloth trade goods, secured in the hold. Bjorn sees her coming and straightens up. For a moment they just look at each other. "How long?" she asks. 3 months, maybe 4. We'll be back before the harvest." "You'd better be. I'm not bringing in the barley by myself." He smiles, but it doesn't reach his eyes. They've done this dance before. 5 times in their marriage he's sailed away for summer trading voyages. 4 times he's come back. The one time he didn't, the summer of 938, she spent 6 months thinking she was a widow before he finally stumbled back into the Longhouse with a broken arm and stories of a storm that drove them all the way to the Orkney Islands. "Leif will take care of himself," Bjorn says, reading her mind. "He's ready for this. He's 20 years old, he's a baby. I was 19 on my first voyage, and that's supposed to make me feel better." Bjorn pulls her close. They're not usually demonstrative in public. Vikings didn't go in for big emotional displays, but right now, with dawn breaking and the ship waiting, he holds her tight. "We'll come back," and he says into her hair. "We always do." "Some don't. We will." She wants to believe him. She wants to believe that in 3 or 4 months she'll see that sail on the horizon and know they're safe. But she's a Viking woman. She knows the statistics. Every voyage some men don't return. Storms, battles, disease, simple accidents, the sea takes what it wants when it wants. Leif appears beside them, trying to look confident and probably failing. His eyes are bright with excitement and terror in equal measure. This is his first real voyage, his first chance to prove himself as a man, his first time beyond the familiar waters of the coast. "Mama," he says, and his voice cracks slightly, still 20 years old, still her little boy under all that bravado. "Come back," she says. "Both of you. That's an order." "Yes, Mama." She kisses his forehead, then Bjorn's cheek, and walks back up the beach before the tears can start. She won't cry in front of them, won't give them that weight to carry across the North Sea. They need to focus on surviving, not on her grief. From the Longhouse door she watches as the ship is pushed into the water, watches as the men climb aboard, watches as the single square sail is raised catching the early morning wind, watches as the ship, one of those beautiful, terrifying dragon-headed vessels that would strike fear into coastal villages from Ireland to the Black Sea, slides away from shore and heads out toward the open ocean. And then they're gone, just a shape on the horizon. Then not even that. Astrid stands there until the sun has fully risen, which takes about another hour in the strange stretched-out dawn of Midsummer. Then she turns back to the Longhouse squares her shoulders and becomes something else entirely. She becomes the farm manager, the decision-maker, the person responsible for keeping everyone alive until the men return. Let me tell you what this actually meant, because this is where Viking women really came into their own, and it's a story that gets overlooked way too often. When the men left on summer voyages, and we're talking about a significant portion of the male population, sometimes half or more of the fighting-age men from a given area, the women didn't just sit around weaving and waiting. They ran everything. The farm, the livestock, the fields, the trading, the legal matters, the religious ceremonies, the protection of the property, everything. Viking women had legal rights that were extraordinary for medieval Europe. They could own property in their own names, they could inherit, they could divorce their husbands and take their dowries with them. They could represent themselves in court, they could conduct business transactions without male permission. But more than legal rights, they had practical power. When Bjorn sailed away, Astrid didn't become a caretaker manager waiting for the real authority to come home. She became the authority. Period. Let's see what that looks like in practice. It's now mid-June. The barley is growing, you can see the green shoots coming up in neat rows across the field. The vegetables are establishing themselves. The livestock have been moved to summer pasture in the hills where the grass is better, and the mosquitoes are slightly less apocalyptic. Astrid stands in what's become her headquarters, the main room of the Longhouse, where she's spread out a collection of notched sticks. Each stick represents a different aspect of the farm's operations. This one tracks the livestock, how many cows, goats, sheep, chickens. This one tracks the grain stores. This one tracks debts owed and debts owing. Vikings didn't have written accounting in the way we think of it. Most couldn't read or write, but they had these elaborate memory systems using physical objects, notched sticks, knotted cords, marked stones. Astrid can look at a stick and know instantly that they owe Thorstein's farm 3 barrels of salted fish from last year's trade, and that Thorstein's wife promised her 2 goats in exchange. Can you imagine managing a complex agricultural operation entirely in your head and through physical memory aids, no spreadsheets, no written records, just your brain, your memory, and a collection of marked wooden sticks? Today's first order of business, the livestock need checking. One of the goats is pregnant and due any day, and you don't want to lose a kid to predators or difficult birth. Astrid sends Sigrid and young Knut up to the summer pasture with instructions to stay there overnight if needed. If she goes into labour and there's trouble, send Knut back for me, Astrid tells Sigrid. Don't try to handle it alone. Sigrid nods. She's 2 weeks married now, living at Halvard's farm, but she comes back regularly to help her mother. The wedding was simple but joyful, a feast, some gifts exchanged between families, the ceremonial hammering of Thor's symbol into the marriage bed to bless their union with fertility. Then Sigrid moved to her husband's household and started learning to manage a different farm. But right now, with Halvard gone on the same voyage as her father and brother, Sigrid is back home helping. That's how it worked. Family networks, mutual support, everyone helping everyone else survive. Second order of business, the weaving. With the longer days and better weather, the women can spend more time on textile production. Cloth was currency in the Viking world. You could trade cloth for almost anything. Good wool cloth, finely woven, was worth more per pound than grain. Astrid has a vertical loom set up at one end of the Longhouse, a tall wooden frame with weight hanging from the warp threads. She can weave while standing, working the weft thread back and forth, creating the fabric that will become clothing blankets, sailcloth trade goods. The female thrall, Sina, is helping with the spinning. She sits in the corner with a drop spindle, turning raw wool into thread with practiced movements. Spin drop, catch wind, spin again. Hour after hour, it's monotonous work but essential. You can't weave without thread, and you can't make thread without someone spending hundreds of hours spinning. Here's something that'll change how you think about Viking cloth. A single wool tunic required about 40 hours of spinning just to create the thread. Then another 20 to 30 hours of weaving. Then cutting, sewing, finishing. We're talking 70 to 80 hours of labour for one piece of clothing. And people needed multiple pieces of clothing, at least 2 or 3 tunics, cloaks, for winter, undergarments, socks, hats. The average Viking household might spend 1,000 hours per year just producing cloth. 1,000 hours. That's a part-time job for 2 people year-round. This is why cloth was valuable. This is why it was used as currency. This is why stealing someone's clothes was a serious crime. That wasn't just fabric, that was hundreds of hours of human labour. Third order of business, and this is where things get interesting, legal matters. Dispute has arisen between Astrid's farm and the neighbouring farm owned by a man named Ulf. The issue is grazing rights. There's a meadow between the 2 properties and both farms have been using it for summer pasture. But this year Ulf's cows have been eating more than their fair share. and Ulf's wife Bergthora is being difficult about it. Normally this would be settled between the men, but the men are gone, so it falls to Astrid and Bergthora to work it out. They meet at the disputed meadow. Bergthora brings 2 witnesses, her eldest daughter and a neighbour woman. Astrid brings Helga and the male thrall Einar as witnesses. In Viking legal culture, witnesses were everything. Your word plus witnesses could win or lose a case. Your cows are eating too much, Astrid says, direct and calm. The meadow isn't marked, Bergthora counters. How do I know where my rights end and yours begin? Our families have shared this meadow for 3 generations. Your husband knows the boundaries. My husband isn't here, and I say the boundaries are unclear. This goes on for about 20 minutes, back and forth, each woman making her case, the witnesses watching carefully so they can testify later if needed. Neither woman raises her voice, neither shows anger. This is business. This is how you settle disputes when you can't risk violence, because you might need each other's help next winter. Finally, Astrid proposes a solution. They'll get stones and mark the boundary clearly right now so there's no confusion. Half the meadow to each farm, equal shares. Bergthora considers this. It's fair. Fair is respected in Viking culture more than almost anything else. Fair means balance, and balance means social peace, and social peace means survival. Agreed, Bergthora says. They spend the next hour placing stones in a line across the meadow, defining the boundary. When it's done, they shake hands, an actual handshake, which in Viking culture is binding. You shake on an agreement, you honour it. Break a handshake agreement and you become oathbreaker, and that's a reputation that can destroy you. As Astrid walks back to the Longhouse, she feels a small sense of satisfaction. Problem solved, no violence, no lingering resentment. Just 2 women doing what needed to be done. But there are other problems that don't have easy solutions. The male thrall Einar is getting restless. Astrid can see it. He's been enslaved for 6 years now, taken in a raid when he was 19. He's from Ireland, originally captured when Vikings hit his village. His family is probably dead. His old life is gone, and he's strong enough now and angry enough that he could be dangerous if he decides to rebel. Astrid knows she needs to watch him carefully. Maybe work him harder to exhaust him. Maybe show some small kindness to keep him compliant, extra food now and then, a better sleeping spot. It's a constant calculation. How do you control someone who has every reason to hate you? The honest answer is that you can't not really. You can only try to make the cost of rebellion higher than the cost of compliance, and you accept that someday some thralls will run, some will fight back. Some will kill their masters in the night and disappear into the forest. It happened. The sagas record it. Gaped and formed outlaw bands. Thralls who murdered their owners. The whole system was built on violence and the threat of violence, and sometimes that violence came back around. Astrid doesn't sleep well these nights. Part of it is worry about Bjorn and Leif out there somewhere on the North Sea. But part of it is the knowledge that she's alone in a longhouse with 2 enslaved people who would probably kill her if they thought they could get away with it. Welcome to the reality of being a Viking woman in charge. As Midsummer approaches the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, the community gathers again for celebration. But this one feels different from Valpergus. That was about fertility and planting and hope. This is about light, about gratitude for the sun, about acknowledging that from this day forward the days will get shorter. The darkness is coming back slowly but surely. The festival is quieter without the men. There's still music, still some dancing, still shared food. But the energy is different. The women are tired. They've been doing double work, their own labour, plus the labour the men would normally do. And underneath the celebration there's this current of anxiety. Where are the ships right now? Are our husbands alive? Will they come back? Little Ragnhild asks the question. Everyone's thinking, when will Papa come home? Soon, Astrid says, hoping it's true. But when? When the gods will it. When the seas allow it. When the trading is done and the holds are full and the winds turn favourable. It's not a satisfying answer, but it's the only honest one. That night after the festival, after the fire has died down and everyone has gone back to their farms, Astrid stands outside the Longhouse and looks at the northern horizon. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of sight, is a ship with her husband and son aboard. She whispers a prayer to Njord, god of the sea and sailors, to Ran, goddess of drowning, asking her to spare them, to Thor asking for protection from storms. And then she goes back inside, checks on the sleeping children, adds wood to the fire, and prepares for another day of work. Because that's what Viking women did. They worked, they managed, they survived. They held everything together while the men were gone. And when the men came back, if they came back, the women would step aside and let them retake control because that was the social order. But for these months, this summer, this season, the farm belongs to Astrid. The decisions are hers. The responsibility is hers. The power is hers. And soon, very soon, we'll see what happens when the harvest time arrives and the real test begins. When all that spring planting either succeeds or fails. When the abundance of summer must be transformed into the stores that will carry them through another winter. The fields are growing. The livestock are fattening. The work continues. And somewhere out there on a ship with a dragon's head prow, Bjorn and Leif are learning whether they'll become traders or raiders, whether they'll find fortune or death, whether they'll ever see home again. The cycle turns. The sun begins its slow descent. Summer fades toward harvest. The barley is ready. Astrid knows it without even touching the stalks. She can see it in the way they bend in the wind, heavy with grain. She can see it in the colour, that perfect golden brown that means the kernels inside are plump and ripe. She can feel it in the air that shift from late summer to early autumn, when everything seems to pause and hold its breath before the frenzy begins. It's higher near now, the haymaking month, late July bleeding into August. And every single person on this farm is about to work harder than they've worked since the planting. Because harvest season isn't just about gathering food, it's about racing against time itself. Here's what most people don't understand about pre-industrial agriculture. Timing is everything, and the margin for error is microscopic. Harvest the barley too early and the kernels won't be fully developed. You lose yield, you lose nutrition. You might not have enough to survive winter. Harvest too late and the grain shatters from the stalks and falls to the ground, where it rots or gets eaten by birds and mice. You also risk rain, which can destroy a standing crop in hours. The window between too early and too late is maybe 10 days, 2 weeks maximum. And during that window, you have to cut, bundle dry thresh winnow and store every bit of grain your family needs to survive the next 8 months. No pressure, right? Astrid stands at the edge of the barley field as the sun rises. The dew is still heavy on the stalks, making them too wet to cut, so she has maybe an hour before the real work begins. She uses that hour to mentally organise the labour. Sigrid and Halvard's wife, her daughter-in-law still getting used to being called that, will handle the cutting. They'll use sickles' short curved blades with wooden handles, and they'll work in a rhythm, grab a handful of stalks with left hand, sweep the sickle through them. With the right drop, the cut grain move forward, repeat. Do that about 10,000 times and you've harvested one field. Young Knut and Ragnhild will follow behind, gathering the cut grain into bundles and tying them with twisted straw. Their backs will ache from the constant bending. Their hands will blister from the rough stalks. But they're old enough to work now, 12 and 7, and in a Viking household everyone works. The thralls will haul the bundles to the drying racks. These are wooden frames set up near the longhouse where the Grain bundles can lean against each other, allowing air to circulate and dry them out before threshing. This is back-breaking work, lifting, carrying, stacking all day long and under the August sun. And Astrid. She'll supervise everything, troubleshoot problems and make decisions, and probably end up doing whatever task is falling behind because there are never enough hands for all the work that needs doing. Old Helga will stay at the Longhouse managing the cooking and keeping water available for everyone. Harvest work is dehydrating. People need to drink constantly or they'll collapse. Helga knows this. She's seen people drop from heat exhaustion during harvest. She won't let it happen on her watch. The sun climbs higher. The dew evaporates. Astrid nods to the crew. "Let's bring it in," she says. They move into the field like an army going to war, because that's what this is, a war against time, against weather, against the possibility of failure. Sigrid swings her sickle in smooth, practiced arcs. She learned this as a child watching her mother, and now her muscle memory takes over. Grab, cut, drop, move. Grab, cut, drop, move. The rhythm is almost meditative if you can ignore the ache in your shoulders and the sweat dripping into your eyes. Behind her, Knut gathers the fallen stalks. He's trying to work as fast as his sister, trying to prove he's strong, trying to be useful. But he's 12 and his arms aren't as long, and he keeps dropping bundles and having to retie them. He's frustrated with himself, close to tears, but he doesn't stop. Vikings don't stop. Little Ragnhild is struggling. She's 7 and this is her first real harvest. The stalks are nearly as tall as she is. The work is hard and boring and the sun is hot and she wants to go play in the stream. But when she sees her grandmother watching from the Longhouse door, she straightens up and keeps working. She won't be the one who quits. Have you ever done this kind of work? Not for an hour, not for an afternoon, but day after day for 2 weeks straight. The kind of work where your body screams at you to stop, but you can't, because if you stop, people die. It changes you. It teaches you things about yourself, about your limits, about pushing past those limits, about what you're actually capable of when survival is on the line. By midday, they've harvested maybe a quarter of the field. They break for a meal, barley porridge, dried fish water from the stream. They eat quickly, barely tasting it, because there's no time to waste. Astrid looks at the sky. Clear now, but there are clouds building to the west. Weather coming maybe in 3 or 4 days. They need to work faster. Shorter breaks this afternoon, she announces. We need to finish this field before that weather hits. Nobody argues. They know she's right. Back to work. Grab, cut, drop, move. Gather, bundle, tie, stack. The sun beats down. Sweat soaks through clothing. Hands blister and bleed. Nobody complains. This is Viking life. This is what survival actually looks like. By evening, they've finished the first field. Tomorrow they'll start on the second smaller field. And then the vegetables, turnips, carrots, onions all need to be harvested and stored, and then the hay cutting for the livestock's winter feed. The work never ends, but tonight there's a small celebration, because finishing the first field is a milestone worth marking. They gather around the Longhouse fire. Astrid has broken out some of the better food smoked venison from last winter's hunting, fresh-baked flatbread, even a little honey to drizzle on top. There's ale, not the thin everyday ale, but the good stuff brewed strong. Helga tells a story about the harvest goddess, not one of the main gods like Odin or Thor, but one of the older spirits, the land spirits who control whether crops grow or fail. According to the story, you have to leave the last sheaf of grain in the field as an offering. The last sheaf for the goddess, Helga says. Never take it all, never be greedy. This was real Viking practice documented in multiple sources. The last bit of grain, called the last sheaf, or sometimes Odin's sheaf, was left standing in the field or woven into a decorative form and kept in the house as a blessing for next year's harvest. It was part gratitude, part insurance policy. Honour the spirits and maybe they'll continue to bless your fields. Little Ragnhild asks the question that's been on everyone's mind: when will Papa and Leif come home? Astrid's smile doesn't quite reach her eyes. Soon, hopefully. The trading season is ending. They should be heading back any day now. But what if they don't come back? Children ask the questions adults are too afraid to voice. Then we survive anyway, Astrid says, and her voice is steady even though her heart is hammering. We've brought in the harvest. We're going to preserve it properly. We'll make it through winter with or without them. That's what we do. That's what Viking women have always done. Sigrid reaches over and squeezes her mother's hand. She understands now in a way she didn't before she got married what it means to be a Viking wife. It means managing a farm. It means making life or death decisions. It means being strong enough to survive even when the person you love most in the world might be dead at the bottom of the ocean. The next 2 weeks are a blur of relentless work. They harvest the second barley field, the vegetable plots cut and stack hay until the racks are overflowing. Every day is the same wake before dawn work until you can't see anymore, collapse onto the sleeping bench, wake up and do it again, but they're winning the race. The grain is coming in. The vegetables are being pulled and sorted. The hay is drying. And then comes the moment Astrid has been dreading: the festival of Freyfaxi. This celebration held in August honours Freyr, the god of fertility and harvest. It's a time to give thanks for the abundance, to make offerings, to recognise that the land has provided, and you've done your part to receive that provision. But it's also traditionally the time when the first slaughtering of horses happens. Horses were sacred to Freyr, and eating horse meat at Freyfaxi was part of the religious observance. Most farms didn't keep many horses. They were expensive to feed and maintain, but when they did slaughter one, this was the time. Astrid's farm has one horse, just one. An old mare named Sleipnir, maybe 16 years old, who's been with the farm since before Leif was born. She's too old to work much anymore, eats more than she's worth, and the practical decision is clear. But Knut loves that horse. He learned to ride on her. He's been taking care of her since he was old enough to haul water. And now Astrid has to tell him that Sleipnir is going to be slaughtered for the festival. She finds him in the stable brushing the old mare's coat. "Knut, we need to talk." He looks up and somehow he already knows. Children always know. "No," he says. "It's time. She's old, she's suffering, and we need the meat." "She's not suffering, she's fine. Knut, I'll work harder. I'll gather more hay. I'll make sure she's worth keeping, please." Astrid kneels down so she's eye level with her son. This is part of life here. Animals serve us, and when they can't serve anymore, they give us one last gift. Their meat keeps us alive through winter. Sleipnir has had a good life, she's been treated well, and now she'll help us survive. That's honourable. I don't want her to die. I know, but wanting doesn't change what needs to happen. This is the conversation that breaks hearts but builds Vikings. This is where children learn that feelings don't override necessity, that love doesn't exempt you from hard choices, that death is part of the cycle, and you honour it rather than fighting it. The festival comes. The community gathers. Sleipnir is slaughtered quickly with a prayer to Freyr, and her meat is distributed among several households. Knut doesn't attend the festival. He stays in the Longhouse silent and angry and grieving. Helga sits with him. She doesn't try to make it better. She just sits there, a quiet presence, letting him feel what he needs to feel. "Your father had a dog once," she says eventually. "When he was about your age, best hunting dog in the valley. But one winter we were starving. I mean really starving, and we had to make a choice." Knut looks up. "He cried for days," Helga continues, "but he also understood, and he never forgot that dog, never stopped honouring what that animal gave him. Both the years of companionship and that final gift of survival. Did it get easier? No. It never gets easier, but you learn to carry it. You learn that loving something means accepting all of it, the joy and the loss. That's what makes us human, and not just animals ourselves. As August fades towards September, the preservation work intensifies. This is where all that harvested abundance has to be transformed into food that will last 6 months. The barley is threshed, beaten with wooden flails to separate the grain from the chaff. Then it's winnowed, tossed in the air so the wind blows away the lighter chaff and the heavier grain falls back into baskets. It's dusty, miserable work that leaves everyone coughing and covered in grain dust. The cleaned barley goes into storage bins carefully sealed and to keep out moisture and pests. Some of it will be ground into flour for bread. Some will be kept whole for porridge. Some will be malted and brewed into beer. The vegetables are being processed. Turnips are being sliced and dried. Carrots are being packed in sand in the underground storage. Onions are being braided and hung from the rafters. Apples from the small orchard are being dried in the sun or made into preserves with precious honey. The pace is exhausting. Every person on the farm is working from dawn until late into the night. Even old Helga, who can't do heavy labour anymore, is sorting vegetables, checking for rot, making sure everything is stored properly. And through it all, Astrid is checking the horizon, watching for a sail, hoping that any day now she'll see that familiar dragon-headed ship rounding the point and heading for shore. One evening, as the sun sets red and gold over the ocean, little Ragnhild asks again, "Mamma, do you think they're okay?" Astrid pulls her daughter close. "I think," she says carefully, "that your father and brother are doing what they need to do, just like we're doing what we need to do. And I think that if the gods are kind, we'll see them again soon. But what if the gods aren't kind? Then we remember them, we honour them, we tell stories about them, and we keep living because that's what they want us to do." It's the most honest answer she can give, because that's the reality of Viking life. You do the work, you hope for the best, you prepare for the worst, and you accept that some things are beyond your control, decided by gods and fate and the whims of the sea. The harvest is nearly complete. The fields are cut bare. The storage rooms are filling up. The work has been brutal, but they've done it. They've gathered enough, barely enough maybe, but enough to make it through another winter. Now all that's left is to wait, to finish the last bits of preservation, to hope the weather holds long enough to get everything properly stored, and to pray that 2 men on a ship somewhere in the North Sea are heading home. The nights are getting longer, the air is getting colder, the cycle is turning toward autumn, toward slaughter season, toward the long dark winter ahead. And soon, very soon, we'll see what happens when those choices become even harder. When the abundance of harvest has to be carefully managed through the brutal calculations of who eats how much and what gets saved for seed. The fields lie empty now, stubble and straw left for this land's spirits. The storage rooms are full. The family is exhausted but satisfied. The harvest is in. The first battle of survival is won, but the war is just beginning. Blood on the autumn grass. That's the image that defines Gormanudur, the slaughter month, and it's an image that haunts every Viking farmer from late October through November, because this is when you make the calculations that will determine whether your family survives the winter or starves in the spring. It's early October now, and Astrid stands in the pasture counting livestock. 2 cows, 7 goats, 12 sheep, 20 chickens, 1 pig. These animals represent months of feeding, months of care, months of investment. And now she has to decide which ones die and which ones live. The math is brutal and simple. How much hay did we cut this summer? How much grain can we spare from human consumption to feed animals? How many animals can we keep alive through 6 months of winter without running out of food for ourselves? There's no room for sentiment here. There's no room for attachment. You look at the animals as walking food storage calories on 4 legs and you calculate which ones give you the best return on investment. Here's how the calculation works, and I want you to really understand this because it's so different from how we think about food now. A cow needs approximately 15 pounds of hay per day to stay healthy through winter. That's 4,500 pounds of hay for a 6-month winter. 2 cows means 9,000 pounds. Did you cut 9,000 pounds of hay this summer? If not, one of those cows has to die. Today, right now, before you waste another day's worth of feed on an animal you can't afford to keep. But wait, it's more complicated than that. A cow is worth more alive than dead in some ways. A lactating cow produces milk, which means butter, cheese nutrition for children. A cow can breed and give you calves, which are future cows' future food security. A cow can pull a plough in spring, which means you can plant more grain. So maybe you don't kill the cow, maybe you kill 3 of the sheep instead, which consume less hay per animal but give you less meat and fewer benefits. Or maybe you kill 5 of the goats. Or maybe you make a gamble and try to keep everything alive on shorter rations and hope it works out. These are the kinds of decisions that kept Viking farmers awake at night. Astrid walks among the animals, touching each one, evaluating. This goat is pregnant, keep her. That one is old and her milk production is dropping, she's a candidate for slaughter. This sheep has good wool, keep her for spring shearing. That one has a bad leg slaughter. This cow is strong and healthy and still producing milk, definitely keep. The other cow is smaller, produces less, and isn't pregnant, probably slaughter. But the probably is what kills you emotionally. Because that smaller cow leaf raised her from a calf. Bottle-fed her when her mother rejected her, named her Frida. Spent hours with her in the barn, talking to her like she was a friend. And now Astrid has to decide if Frida lives or dies based on hay calculations. This is what I mean when I say Viking life wasn't romantic. It was practical to the point of heartbreak. She makes her list. 4 goats to slaughter, 3 sheep, 1 cow, yes Frida. The pig, about half the chickens. This will give them enough preserved meat to supplement their diet through winter, while conserving enough hay and grain to keep the breeding stock alive. The slaughtering begins the next day and it's a family affair. Everyone participates because everyone needs to understand where food comes from. Needs to respect the sacrifice, needs to know how to do this themselves when they're running their own farms. They start with the chickens because they're the easiest. Astrid hands little Ragnhild a chicken. Hold her wings like this, she demonstrates. Keep her calm, talk to her. Ragnhild's eyes are wide. She's 8 years old now, and this is her first time actually participating in a slaughter. She's seen it before, watched from a distance, but now she's holding a living creature that's about to die. Why do we have to kill her? Ragnhild asks. Because we need food to survive the winter, and she's food. That's her purpose, that's why we raised her, and we're going to honour that purpose by using every bit of her, the meat, the feathers, even the bones for soup. Astrid takes the chicken, speaks a quick word to the animal, not a prayer exactly, more like an acknowledgement, and makes the cut. Quick, clean, the chicken barely struggles. See, Astrid says gently, it's fast, she didn't suffer. That's important. We don't make them suffer if we can help it. Ragnhild is crying quietly, but she's watching, learning. This is how you become a Viking adult, through these small deaths, these necessary cruelties, these lessons in survival. They process 12 chickens that morning. By afternoon, the chickens are plucked, gutted, and hanging in the cold storage area. The feathers are saved for pillows and insulation. The guts are set aside for the pigs. Oh wait, they're slaughtering the pig later. Well, for the dogs then, nothing wasted. The next day they move on to the goats. Goats are harder than chickens. They are bigger, more aware, more clearly, animals with personalities. The 4 goats marked for slaughter include one that Knut has been particularly fond of, not as attached as he was to Sleipnir the horse, but fond nonetheless. He's learned his lesson from that loss, though. He doesn't argue. He doesn't beg. He just goes quiet, his face carefully blank, and helps his mother prepare. The male thrall Einar does most of the actual killing. He's good at it, quick, efficient, and surprisingly respectful. Maybe it's because he understands what it's like to be powerless to have your fate in someone else's hands. He kills the goats fast, minimizing their fear and pain. Then comes the real work processing the carcasses. And this is where Viking efficiency really shows. First, the blood is caught in wooden buckets. This isn't wasted, it'll be mixed with fat and oats to make blood sausages. Vikings ate blood sausages regularly. High in iron, high in protein, and they used the intestines as casings, so again, nothing wasted. The hide is carefully removed and set aside for tanning. Good leather is valuable. You can make shoes, bags, straps, clothing. A well-tanned goat hide could be traded for other goods. The meat is butchered into sections. Some will be eaten fresh in the next few days, a rare treat of fresh meat before winter sets in. But most of it needs to be preserved immediately. Remember the preservation techniques we talked about earlier. Now you're going to see them in action. Some of the meat is heavily salted and packed into barrels. The salt draws out moisture and creates an environment where bacteria can't survive. This meat will last months, though it'll be incredibly salty and tough. Some is being smoked. They've set up a smoking rack in a small outbuilding, and Einar keeps a fire going with green wood alder and birch, which give a good flavour. The meat hangs in the smoke for days, slowly drying and taking on that smoky flavour while the smoke compounds preserve it. And this is the part that always surprises people, is packed in sour whey. Remember how we talked about this before? The fermented whey from cheese making creates a lactic acid bath that preserves meat without salt. It tastes incredibly sour, almost unbearably sour to modern palates, but it works. Every scrap is used. The bones are set aside for soup stock. The organs, heart, liver, kidneys are eaten fresh because they don't preserve well. The hooves are boiled down for glue. Even the horns are kept for making tools or decorative items. You know what's really striking about this process? The reverence. These people are killing animals. They have raised animals. They've cared for animals. They've named in some cases. And they're doing it with respect. They're not cruel, they're not wasteful, they're acknowledging that these animals are giving their lives so humans can survive, and they're honouring that sacrifice by using everything. Compare that to how we treat industrial meat production now. We don't see the animals, we don't know their names, we waste huge portions of them. We're completely disconnected from the reality of what meat actually is, a life traded for a life. The Vikings couldn't afford that disconnect. They lived too close to the edge. 3 days into the slaughter month, they get to Frida the cow. This is the hardest one. Not for Astrid, though it's hard for her too, but for Knut, and especially for Leif, who won't even be here to see it. He's still out there somewhere with Bjorn, hopefully alive, hopefully on his way home, completely unaware that his childhood friend is about to be killed. Knut volunteers to help with this one. He's 13 now, old enough to participate in the bigger slaughters, old enough to face hard things. Frida is led to the killing area. She's calm, trusting. She doesn't know what's coming. That's a mercy at least. Einar speaks to her quietly in his native Irish words the cow doesn't understand, but the tone is gentle. He positions himself carefully. The kill has to be precise. One strike to the base of the skull with a heavy hammer, followed immediately by cutting the throat to drain the blood. Done right, the animal dies instantly, no pain, no fear. Einar raises the hammer. Knut looks away. The hammer falls. Frida drops. The throat is cut. Blood flows into the waiting buckets. It's over in seconds. Knut is crying now silently, but he's helping. He's holding the buckets. He's learning. This is the cost of survival. This is what it means to eat meat. This is reality. Processing Frida takes the entire day. A cow is huge, maybe 800 pounds. That's hundreds of pounds of meat plus the hide, the bones, the organs, everything. The best cuts are eaten fresh over the next week. This is a feast time actually, late October, early November, when fresh meat is abundant because of all the slaughtering. People eat well during Gormanodeur. It's the last good eating before the long preservation food winter sets in. The festival of Vetneta Winter Nights happens on October the 31st. This marks the official end of the harvest season and the beginning of winter. It's also a night when the veil between the worlds is thin, when ancestors can visit when magic is strong. The whole community gathers for a feast. Every farm contributes some of their fresh slaughter meat. There's beef, pork, goat, mutton, chicken, more meat than they've seen in months. There's fresh baked bread, there's ale flowing freely, there's music and stories and laughter, but underneath the celebration there's something darker. This is the goddess Hela's night, Hela who rules over the dead, who waits for everyone eventually. The Vikings believed that on this night the dead could return to share in the feast. Old Helga sets out a plate of food and a cup of ale for the spirits of the dead. For her husband dead 15 years now, for her children who didn't survive to adulthood, for ancestors going back generations. They're still part of the family, she explains to Ragnhild. Death doesn't change that. They watch over us. They guide us. We honour them by remembering. Little Ragnhild, who watched her first chicken die just days ago, who's beginning to understand what death actually means, asks, "Is Sleipnir there with the dead people?" Helga smiles. "Maybe. The best animals have spirits too. Maybe Sleipnir is running in the fields of the gods now, young again, strong again. And Frida. This is how Vikings dealt with death, by incorporating it into life. By acknowledging it, honouring it, but not being destroyed by it. Death was part of the cycle. You respected it, you feared it, but you didn't let it stop you from living. The divination happens that night. The vulva is there, the same old woman from the spring festival, and people are asking her to see the future, to tell them if their men will come home from trading voyages, if the winter will be hard, if the harvest stored will be enough. Astrid pays her 3 silver coins to ask about Bjorn and Leif. The vulva goes into a trance, her eyes rolling back, her body swaying. It might be real shamanic power. It might be theatre. Astrid doesn't really care. She just wants to hear something hopeful. "I see a ship," the vulva murmurs. "I see water. I see 2 men, one older, one younger. I see silver in their hands. I see them coming home." It's vague enough to mean anything, but Astrid chooses to believe it. She needs to believe it. The festival continues late into the night. There's dancing around a bonfire. Some people are telling stories about ancestors who did brave things. Some are making toast to the gods, to Odin, for wisdom, to Thor, for strength, to Freyja, for love, to Hela, for mercy when the time comes. And some are slipping away into the darkness for other activities. This is a fertility festival too in its way, a celebration of life in the face of approaching death and winter. Astrid sits by the fire with Helga, watching the young people dance and flirt and laugh. "We've done it," she says quietly. "We've brought in the harvest. We've slaughtered and preserved. We're ready for winter." "If the stores hold," Helga says, "if no one gets sick, if the roof doesn't leak, if the wolves don't get into the livestock, if—" "I know," Astrid interrupts. "There are always ifs, but we've done our part. The rest is up to the gods." They sit in comfortable silence, 2 women who've survived decades of this cycle, watching another generation learn how to survive it too. As the festival winds down and people begin to drift back to their farms, Astrid takes one last look at the dark ocean. Somewhere out there, maybe a ship is sailing home. Maybe her husband and son are alive. Maybe they'll arrive before the first snow falls. Or maybe they won't. Maybe she's already a widow and doesn't know it yet. Maybe Leif died in some foreign land and his body is feeding fish at the bottom of the North Sea. But standing here worrying about it won't change anything. So she goes back to the Longhouse, checks on her sleeping children, adds wood to the fire, and prepares for the next day's work. Because the work never stops. The slaughtering is done, but now comes the final preservation tasks. The meat needs checking. The storage areas need organising. The tools need repairing before winter locks everything down. And soon, very soon, we'll see what happens when the first snow falls and the men still haven't returned. When Astrid has to make the hardest decision of all, how long do you wait before you accept that they're not coming back? The nights are cold now, the days are short. The slaughter month is ending, giving way to the winter months. The blood on the grass is frozen. The meat hangs in the cold storage. The survivors, both human and animal, settle in to wait for spring. The cycle continues. It always does. A sail on the horizon. Ragnhild sees it first. She's down by the shore collecting driftwood for kindling when she spots the dark shape against the grey November sky. She drops her basket and runs screaming at the top of her lungs. A ship, mama, there's a ship. Astrid is outside the Longhouse checking the dried meat racks when she hears her daughter's voice. Her heart stops. Then it starts hammering so hard she can feel it in her throat. She runs to the beach, Helga hobbling after her as fast as she can, Knut abandoning his work in the stable to sprint down the hill. There, on the horizon, a square sail, dark against the clouds. Getting bigger, getting closer. Is it them? Is it Bjorn and Leif? Or is it raiders coming to steal what they've worked so hard to preserve? Astrid shields her eyes against the wind, trying to make out details. The ship is close enough now to see the dragonhead prow. That's a long ship, Viking design. But that doesn't mean it's theirs. Could be anyone's. The minutes stretch like hours. The ship comes closer. Astrid can see men now figures moving on the deck. How many? She counts. Maybe 20, 25? That's about right for their trading expedition. Closer still. And then yes, that's Bjorn standing at the prow. She'd recognise his stance anywhere, the way he leans forward, slightly eager to reach land. And beside him, taller than when he left, is Leif. They're alive. They're home. Astrid doesn't cry. Viking women don't cry, not where people can see. But her knees go weak and she has to sit down on the beach just for a moment, just to breathe. Ragnhild is jumping up and down, screaming with joy. Knut is grinning so wide his face might split. Even old Helga is smiling, her eyes wet despite herself. The ship beaches. Men jump out, splashing through the shallow water, laughing and calling greetings to families and friends. The whole community is gathering now, women and children running down from the farms, dogs barking chaos, and joy and relief mixing together in a tangle of noise. Bjorn wades through the water and sweeps Astrid into his arms, lifting her off her feet despite the fact that he's soaking wet and probably has salt-crusted clothes that smell like fish and sweat and the sea. "We made it," he says into her hair. "We're home." "I know," she says. "I can see that. 4 months. 4 months of sailing and trading and dodging storms and—" "Tell me, Leia," she interrupts. "Right now, just let me look at you." He's thinner. His face is weathered, more lines around his eyes. There's a new scar on his forearm, maybe 6 inches long healed, but still pink. His hands are rough and salt-damaged. But he's alive. He's whole. He's here. Leif is being mobbed by his siblings. Ragnhild has attached herself to his leg and refuses to let go. Knut is punching his shoulder in that way boys do when they're too old to hug but still want physical contact. Even Sigrid has come down from her husband's farm to welcome her brother home. "You got tall and she says, looking up at him. He's grown at least 2 inches in 4 months, shot up like a weed, and his shoulders are broader from rowing. You got married, he counters. Yeah, well, life doesn't stop when you're gone. They grin at each other, that sibling understanding that needs no words. The unloading begins. This is what everyone's really curious about. What did they bring back? Was the voyage successful? Did they return with enough silver and goods to make 4 months of danger worthwhile? The answer, it turns out, is yes. They're hauling out furs, fox pelts, beaver, even a few bear skins. These were trade goods they took with them, but they kept the best ones to trade in markets further south where they'd get better prices. There are bolts of cloth, fine wool cloth dyed in rich colours, deep blue, brilliant red forest green. This is expensive stuff worth its weight in silver. Astrid runs her hand over one bolt and her eyes light up. This is material for new clothes, for blankets, for trade, for wealth. There's amber. Raw chunks of it, golden and translucent, washed up on Baltic beaches and traded through multiple hands before ending up in their ship. Amber was incredibly valuable. It was made into jewellery, traded to southern markets, treasured by wealthy women across Europe. There are barrels of wine, real wine from Frankish territory, dark and strong. This is luxury beyond belief. Most Vikings only drank ale and mead. Wine was for special occasions, for important guests, for impressing people. And then there's the silver. Bjorn hefts a leather bag and pours it out onto a cloth. Silver coins, dozens of them from different lands. Frankish, Anglo-Saxon, even a few from the Byzantine Empire. Plus hack silver pieces of silver jewellery that have been cut up to use as currency. Arm rings, neck rings, broken bits of brooches, all weighed and valued based on pure silver content. This is wealth, real wealth, enough to trade for livestock, to buy tools, to pay debts, to secure their position in the community. Astrid stares at it. How, she asks simply. Trading, Bjorn says. Mostly trading. We hit markets in Hedeby, in Ryby, sailed over to Jorvik in England. Sold furs, bought cloth, traded cloth for amber. Sold amber for wine, traded wine for silver. He pauses. And there was one undefended monastery. Ah, there it is, the line between trader and raider. Just one. Small place, maybe 10 monks. We didn't hurt anyone. They ran when they saw us coming. We took what we could carry. Mostly silver church implements, some manuscripts. We can probably sell to collectors a few relics. This was standard Viking practice. You'd spend most of your voyage trading legitimately, and then if you happened across an easy target, an undefended church, a merchant ship sailing alone, a coastal village, you'd take advantage. The line between commerce and piracy was blurry at best. And here's the thing, the Vikings didn't see anything wrong with this. Churches were rich. Monks didn't fight back. Why wouldn't you take their wealth? They saw it as opportunity, not crime. The modern perspective is obviously different. We see it as theft, as violence, as religious persecution. But understanding the Viking perspective doesn't mean endorsing it. It means recognizing that they operated under a completely different moral framework. That night, the Longhouse is packed. Not just Bjorn's immediate family, but neighbours, friends, anyone who wants to hear the stories. This is how Vikings did things. You went on a voyage, you came back, you told everyone what happened. And the telling was as important as the doing. The fire is built high. There's fresh meat roasting, some of the slaughter from last month, saved for occasions like this. There's ale flowing. Someone's brought out a lyre and there's music in the background. Bjorn stands near the fire and begins the tale. We left at dawn on the 10th day of Solmenudur. He begins using the formal saga-telling voice. The sea was calm, the wind was favourable, the gods were smiling. We sailed south along the coast, staying in sight of land, watching for shoals and rocks. The audience leans in. Even though some of them were on the voyage and know the story, they want to hear it told properly. Stories are how Vikings make sense of their experiences, How they turn random events into coherent narrative, how they create meaning. 3 days out we hit a storm, Bjorn continues. Waves like mountains, wind that could tear the sail right off the mast. We thought we were dead, thought the sea would take us all. He describes it vividly, the ship pitching and rolling, men hanging on for their lives, bailing water as fast as it came in the absolute terror of knowing you might drown at any second. But we made offerings to Njord and Ran, he says. We threw silver over the side, begged for mercy, and the storm passed. The sea calmed, we survived. Was it the offerings that saved them? Or just luck, or skilled seamanship? It doesn't really matter. What matters is the story, and in the story the gods responded to their prayers. He tells about the trading in Hedeby, a massive Viking trading town in what's now northern Germany. Thousands of people from all over the known world trading everything imaginable. The noise, the crowds, the exotic goods from places they'd never heard of. I saw a man from the Byzantine Empire. Leif interjects, unable to contain himself. He had robes of silk, real silk, and he spoke a language that sounded like music. And he was trading spices, actual spices from the East. I tasted something called cinnamon. It was like nothing I've ever had. The audience murmurs appreciation. Most of them will never see these things, never travel further than the next valley. But through these stories they can imagine. They can experience the wider world second-hand. Bjorn tells about the monastery raid. He doesn't glorify it, but he doesn't apologize either. It was an opportunity. They took it. The monks were unharmed. End of story. What he doesn't mention, what Leif will tell Knut privately later, is the moment of doubt Leif felt. Standing in that church, looking at the terrified faces of the monks holding a silver cross that was probably all they had of value. Leif wondered for the first time if this was right. If taking from people who'd done nothing wrong was something he wanted to be part of, but he took the cross anyway, because that's what Vikings did. And the doubt passed, mostly. The storytelling continues late into the night. Other men from the voyage add their own versions, their own details. It's collaborative memory-making, each person contributing pieces until the whole voyage exists as a shared narrative. There are funny stories too. Like the time one of the crew members, a young guy named Yari, got drunk in a Frankish tavern and tried to fight 3 local men. He lost spectacularly, woke up in a big ditch with a black eye and no pants, and had to sneak back to the ship half naked. Everyone laughs at this. Ari sitting in the corner nursing his ale laughs too. It's a good story. He'll be telling it for years. As the fire burns lower and people start to drift off to sleep, some heading home, some just curling up on the benches in the longhouse because they're too drunk or too tired to walk. Astrid and Bjorn finally have a moment alone outside. How was it really? She asks. Not the stories, the real version. He's quiet for a moment. Harder than I remembered. I'm getting old, Astrid. I'm 45. There were moments when I thought my heart would give out from the rowing. My back hurt every day. I can't do this many more times. Then don't. We need the silver. We need you alive more than we need silver. He pulls her close. This might be my last trading voyage. Let Leif take over. He's ready. He did well out there. Strong, smart, respected by the crew. He's ready to lead. Astrid thinks about her son, still only 20 years old, taking command of a ship full of men twice his age. It terrifies her. But it's the Viking way. You grow up fast or you don't grow up at all. How much longer can we do this? She asks quietly. How many more winters of survival calculations? How many more times saying goodbye, wondering if you'll come back? How many more years of this endless cycle? Until we can't anymore, Bjorn says. That's how long. We keep going until our children can take over, and then they keep going until their children can take over. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. She knows he's right, but knowing doesn't make it easier. Inside, old Helga is telling Ragnhild a story about her own husband dead 15 years now in his trading voyages. He went to Dublin once, she's saying, brought me back a bronze pin from Ireland. I wore it every day until he died. Then I buried it with him so he'd have something of mine in the next world. Ragnhild is almost asleep, her head on her grandmother's lap. Will Papa keep going on voyages? She asks drowsily. Probably not many more, Helga says. But Leif will. And someday maybe your husband will if you marry a trader. I don't want to marry a trader. I want to stay here and not worry. Helga laughs softly. We all want that little one, but wanting and getting are different things. The Longhouse settles into sleep. Bodies everywhere, family, friends, crew members, too drunk to walk home, all tangled together in the warmth and smoke. Tomorrow they'll distribute the trade goods properly, settle accounts, figure out who owes what to whom. But tonight is just for celebration, for stories, for being grateful that most of them made it home. Most, not all. 2 men didn't come back. One died of fever somewhere in Frisia. Another fell overboard during the storm and couldn't be reached in time. Their families will grieve. Their shares of the silver will go to their widows and children. Life goes on. Outside, the first snow is starting to fall. Just a few flakes drifting down through the darkness. Winter is here officially and completely. The door is closed. The fire burns. The year is turning toward Yule, toward the longest nights, toward the final test of whether their preparations were enough. But right now, in this moment, there's abundance. There's meat in the stores and silver in the chest and men home safe and stories to tell. For now it's enough. The cycle continues as it always does. The travellers return, the stories are told, the treasures are distributed. The community comes together to celebrate survival and mourn loss and prepare for what comes next. And what comes next is the deepest darkness of the year, when the gods are closest and the dead return, and everything feels suspended between worlds. When the longest nights demand the biggest celebration just to prove that light still exists somewhere. But we'll get there soon enough. Right now there's sleep and warmth and the sound of breathing all around, proof of life in the midst of winter. Darkness at midday. That's what December feels like this far north. The sun barely crawls above the horizon, just a weak orange glow for a few hours, and then it's gone again, leaving behind this endless twilight that makes you forget what real daylight looks like. It's December 20th, the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, and for the Vikings, this is the most important moment in the entire calendar. Welcome to Yule, or as they called it in Old Norse, Jol. Bjorn has been preparing for this for weeks, not just him, the entire community, because Yule isn't a single night. It's a festival that lasts 12 full days from December 20th through January 1st. 12 nights of feasting, drinking, storytelling, ritual and celebration designed to do one thing, prove to the darkness that it hasn't won. That light still exists, that humans still have hope. Think about what it means to live in Scandinavia in December without electricity, without artificial light, with the sun showing up for maybe 4 hours a day, weak and distant. The darkness is oppressive. It's heavy. It seeps into your bones and makes you wonder if the sun will ever really come back, or if this is it, if the world is sliding into eternal night. And that's why Yule matters. It's not just a party. It's a psychological necessity. It's humans streaming into the void. We're still here. We're still alive. We refuse to give up. The preparation started days ago. Astrid has been brewing special ale stronger than the everyday stuff flavoured with juniper berries and honey. This is sacred ale used for toast to the gods, You don't drink this casually, you drink it with purpose. The Longhouse has been cleaned more thoroughly than any other time of year. Every surface scrubbed, fresh straw on the sleeping benches, new rushes on the floor. The hearth stones have been ritually washed. Why? Because during Yule, the boundary between the living world and the spirit world dissolves. The gods are close, the dead can return, and you want your house to be worthy of divine visitors. Old Helga has been baking for 3 days straight. Not just regular bread, but special Yule bread rich with butter and honey, flavoured with precious spices from Bjorn's trading voyage. There are also cakes made with the last of the summer berries preserved in honey, mixed with nuts and grain. This is food you only eat once a year. Food that reminds everyone that even in the darkest times, sweetness still exists. The pig they slaughtered in October has been saved for this. A whole pig roasted over the fire on a massive spit that Bjorn and Leif built specifically for Yule. The smell of roasting pork has been filling the Longhouse for hours, making everyone's mouth water. And then there's the Yule log. This is a tradition that goes back further than anyone can remember. You find the biggest log you can manage oak if possible, because oak is sacred, and you drag it back to the Longhouse and put it in the fire on the first night of Yule, and it has to burn for all the 12 nights. If it goes out, that's bad luck. Really bad luck. Like maybe we won't survive winter bad luck. Bjorn and Leif spent an entire day selecting the log, cutting it and dragging it back on a sledge. It's massive, maybe 6 feet long, 3 feet thick. When they feed it into the fire pit, it takes up almost the entire hearth. But it'll burn slow smouldering more than flaming, and if they tend it carefully, it'll last the full 12 nights. The first night of Yule begins at sundown, which means around 3 in the afternoon this time of year. The family gathers. Extended family too. Sigrid and her husband, Halvard. Some cousins from neighbouring farms, friends, everyone who can make it through the snow to be here. The Longhouse is packed, maybe 40 people crammed into this space that already felt crowded with 30. But nobody minds. The more people, the more warmth, the more life pushing back against the death and darkness outside. Bjorn stands at the high seat in his position as head of the household and begins the ritual. He holds up a horn filled with the sacred ale. To Odin, he says, his voice carrying through the Longhouse, the All-Father, the Wanderer, the god who sacrificed himself on the world tree for 9 nights to gain wisdom, we honour you with this ale. We ask for your guidance through the dark times. We remember that you too know what it means to suffer, to endure, to wait for light. He drinks, then passes the horn to Astrid. This is important. Women participate fully in Viking religious rituals. They are not passive observers, they are active participants with their own spiritual power. To Thor, Astrid says, protector of Midgard, defender against giants and chaos. We honour your strength. We ask that you keep your hammer between us and the darkness. We ask that you protect this household through winter. She drinks and passes the horn to Leif. To Freya, Leif says, this is the god of fertility, a harvest, prosperity. We thank you for the harvest, we thank you for full storage rooms. We ask that you remember us when spring comes and the planting begins again. Around the circle it goes. Each person offers a toast to a different god or goddess. To Freyja, goddess of love and magic. To Njord, god of the sea, who brought their men home safe. To Tyr, god of justice and right action. Even to Loki, the trickster, because you have to acknowledge all the gods, even the dangerous ones. Especially the dangerous ones. And then Helga the eldest stands and offers the most important toast of all. To the dead, she says quietly. To those who came before. To those who built this farm. To those who survived winters we'll never see. To my husband dead these 15 years. To the children I bore who didn't live to see adulthood, to all the ancestors watching from the other side, we remember you, we honour you, we carry you forward. She pours a portion of ale onto the ground, an offering to the dead, and for a moment the entire longhouse is silent, because this is the heart of Yule. The dead are not gone, they're still part of the family. They're here in this room, sharing this feast, watching over the living. Can you imagine what that must have felt like to truly believe that your ancestors were present, watching, caring about what happened to you? In a world without writing, without photographs, without any way to preserve people except through memory and story, this belief that the dead remained connected to the living was incredibly powerful. The feast begins. And when I say feast, I mean it. This is not the careful rationing they've been doing for months. This is abundance. This is excess. This is eating until you're so full you can barely move. The roasted pig is carved. Everyone gets a portion, even the thralls, because Yule is a time when normal hierarchies soften slightly. Not disappear, but soften. Everyone eats well tonight. There's the special bread dripping with honey and butter. There's stewed vegetables flavoured with herbs. There's dried fish reconstituted in cream. There's cheese both fresh and aged. There's nuts and dried fruit. There's every good thing they've managed to save or preserve or produce. And there's alcohol, so much alcohol. The sacred ale flows freely. Someone breaks out mead honey wine, sweet and strong. And Bjorn has saved one of the barrels of Frankish wine from his trading voyage for tonight. Real wine, dark and rich, unlike anything most of these people have ever tasted. People eat, they drink, they laugh. The longhouse gets warmer and warmer from all the bodies and the massive Yule log burning in the hearth. The smoke is thick, but nobody cares. This is celebration. This is life asserting itself against death. Ragnhild is eating honey cake and getting it all over her face. She's never been allowed to eat like this before, as much as she wants. No rationing, no save some for later. She's in heaven. Knut is trying the wine for the first time. He takes a sip, makes a face, tries to pretend he likes it. The adults laugh. He'll acquire the taste eventually. Everyone does. And then the storytelling begins. This is what Vikings do best, they tell stories. Not just any stories, but the stories. The myths. The sagas. The tales that define who they are and where they came from. A man named Thorstein, known for his skill with words, stands up to tell the story of how Odin gained his wisdom. It's a story everyone knows, but they want to hear it again. They need to hear it again. Odin hung himself on Yggdrasil. Thorstein begins, his voice dropping into the ritual cadence of storytelling. The world tree. He pierced himself with his own spear, and he hung there for 9 nights, 9 long nights, without food, without water, without rest, suffering, enduring, waiting. The audience is rapt. They know this story by heart, but hearing it told well is still powerful. And on the 9th night, Thorstein continues, the runes revealed themselves to him, the secrets of the universe, the knowledge of life and death and everything between. He seized them with his last strength, and he fell from the tree reborn, transformed, wise. This story hits different during Yule, during the longest night, because it's about enduring darkness to reach enlightenment, about suffering that leads to transformation, about the idea that the hardest times can teach you the most important things. Another person tells the story of Baldur's death. Baldur the Beautiful, the beloved god killed by Loki's trickery with a spear of mistletoe, and how his death plunged the world into mourning. But, and this is the important part, Baldur will return after Ragnarok, after the world ends and is reborn. Death is not final. Darkness is not permanent. Everything cycles. The children are falling asleep now, full bellies and warm bodies, and the drone of storytelling lulling them into dreams. But the adults keep going. They'll be up all night because this is the longest night, and you don't sleep through the longest night. You face it. You celebrate through it. You prove that you can outlast the darkness. Around midnight, though, time is hard to track when it's been dark since 3 in the afternoon. Things get wilder. The wild hunt is abroad tonight, or so the stories say. Odin himself leads a spectral hunting party across the sky, chasing spirits and souls, collecting the dead who died in battle, racing through the winter night with ghostly hounds and thunder. You don't want to be outside when the wild hunt passes. Bad things happen to people who see it. They go mad, or they're taken, or they're cursed. So everyone stays inside, but they listen, listening for the sound of hoofbeats in the sky, listening for the baying of phantom hounds. Is it real? Probably not, but in the deep dark of the longest night, with wind howling around the longhouse and strange sounds in the distance, it feels real. And that's what matters. Someone starts singing. An old song older than anyone can remember, in a dialect so ancient that half the words are lost, but the melody survives. Others join in. 40 voices in the soaken firelight singing together, harmonizing, creating sound that pushes back the silence of the winter night. This is community. This is survival. This is humans banding together against a universe that doesn't care if they live or die, and saying, we're still here. We're still singing. We refuse to go quietly. Astrid sits with Bjorn, both of them tired but happy, watching their children and grandchildren. Sigrid is pregnant. They just found out, due in late summer, watching their community celebrate together. She thinks about all the winters she's survived, all the Yules she's celebrated, all the times she wondered if they'd make it, and they did. Another year, she says to Bjorn. Another year, he agrees. How many more do you think we have? As many as the gods give us. No more, no less. And outside snow is falling. Heavy wet snow that will be waist deep by morning. But inside the Yule log burns bright. The fire holds. The community gathers. Life continues. The festival will go on for 12 more nights. 12 nights of slightly less intense celebration, but celebration nonetheless. 12 nights of special food and sacred ale and storytelling and ritual. 12 nights of proving that winter has not won, that spring will come, that the cycle continues. But right now, on this longest night, as the sun reaches its lowest point and begins imperceptibly, impossibly to start climbing back towards summer, they celebrate, they feast, they sing, they remember the dead and honour the gods and love the living. And when dawn finally comes pale week late, they'll still be awake, still tending the Yule log, still refusing to let the darkness have the final word. Because that's what Yule is really about. Not presents or decorations or commercialised celebration. It's about humans facing the deepest darkness of the year and saying, you don't scare us. We've survived worse. We'll survive this too. And we'll do it together as family, as community, as people who refuse to give up. The fire burns. The stories continue. The longest night slowly begins to give way to the promise of light returning. And soon, very soon, we'll see what happens when the deep winter truly sets in, when the celebration is over and the work of survival continues, when the cold gets brutal and the stores start dwindling again and every day is a battle against the elements. But tonight is for joy, for defiance, for life in the face of death. The Yule log crackles and burns, the voices sing. The darkness holds, but it knows light is coming back. It always does. The Yule log has burned out. It lasted the full 12 nights, but now it's just ash and charred wood in the fire pit. The celebration is over. The special food is gone. The sacred ale is finished. And what's left is Thori, the coldest month of the year, stretching ahead like an endless frozen road. January, February, the months the Vikings called the heart of winter, the months that separate the hopeful celebration of Yule from the desperate waiting for spring, the months where you find out if your preparations were actually enough, or if you made a fatal miscalculation somewhere along the line. Astrid wakes to bitter cold. The fire has burned low during the night, not out, never out, but low enough that frost has formed on the inside walls of the longhouse. Yes, you read that right. Inside, the moisture from 40 people breathing all night has frozen on the wooden walls, creating delicate ice crystals that catch the dim firelight. It's beautiful in a hostile sort of way. She wraps a wool cloak around herself. The new one made from the cloth Bjorn brought back from trading dyed a deep blue that she still can't quite believe is real, and adds wood to the fire. The flames catch slowly, reluctantly, as if even fire doesn't want to exist in this cold. Outside the world is white and silent. Snow has piled up against the longhouse walls, creating natural insulation but also trapping everyone inside. The door is frozen shut. It'll take Bjorn and Leif working together with hot water and sheer muscle to get it open. This is Thori. This is the month named after a mythical frost giant, a personification of cold so severe it feels like a living enemy. And the Vikings weren't exaggerating. Archaeological climate data from the Viking Age shows that winters in Scandinavia during this period were even colder than they are now. We're talking average temperatures well below 0 Fahrenheit, with extreme cold snaps that could drop to -30 or 40, without modern heating, without insulated buildings, without electric lights or weather forecasts or emergency services. Just you, your family, your fire, and your will to survive. The daily routine during Thori is different from the rest of the year. There's no farm work to do. Everything is frozen solid. No travelling, the roads are impassable. No major projects that require going outside. Life contracts to the interior of the longhouse, to the space within arm's reach of the fire. So what do people do when they're trapped inside for weeks at a time, with nothing productive to occupy their hands? They make things. They tell stories. They go slowly insane from cabin fever, sometimes all three at once. Astrid has set up her vertical loom again. There's always weaving to be done, always thread to be spun, always cloth to be produced. And weaving is meditative work, the repetitive motion, the gradual progress, the tangible result. It keeps your hands busy and your mind from dwelling too much on the cold, the darkness, the claustrophobia. The female thrall. Sina sits beside her with a drop spindle spinning raw wool into thread. They work in companionable silence, which is its own kind of miracle. 6 months ago, Sina hated Astrid with every fibre of her being, but 6 months of working side by side, of surviving winter together, of shared suffering, creates strange bonds. Not friendship, let's be clear. Signa is still enslaved, still property, still powerless. But there's a mutual respect now, a recognition that they're both women trying to survive in a harsh world, even if their circumstances are vastly different. Over by the fire, Bjorn is carving. He's working on a new chess set. The Vikings played a game called Hnefatafl, similar to chess but with different rules. The pieces are carved from bone and antler, and Bjorn has been working on this set for 3 winters now, adding pieces, slowly perfecting each one. It's something to do with his hands, something to focus on besides the cold and the waiting. Leif is repairing fishing nets. Even though he can't use them right now, the rivers are frozen solid. They'll need to be ready when the ice breaks in spring. He sits cross-legged on a bench, working thread through holes, his fingers cold and clumsy, but persistent. Young Knut is supposed to be practicing his reading. Yes, reading. Some Vikings could read and write runes, though literacy wasn't universal. Knut is learning the runic alphabet carving practice runes into flat pieces of wood. It's tedious work and he'd rather be doing literally anything else, but Bjorn insists. You need to be able to leave messages, he says, to mark property, to record debts and agreements. Knowledge is power, even here. But Knut's attention keeps wandering to the corner where old Helga is telling stories to Ragnhild and a couple of neighbour children who are visiting. This is the real education. This is where Viking culture actually gets transmitted. Helga's voice carries through the longhouse, rough with age, but strong with the confidence of someone who's told these stories 1,000 times. There was a farmer named Egil, she begins, and everyone perks up because Egil's stories are always good. And Egil had a neighbour who kept stealing his sheep. Every time Egil went to count his flock, there were fewer, so Egil set a trap. The children lean in. Even the adults who are pretending to work are listening. He marked one sheep with a special dye that wouldn't wash off. And sure enough, 3 days later, that sheep showed up in his neighbour's flock. So Egil went to the assembly where legal matters are settled, and he brought witnesses who could swear they'd seen him mark the sheep. This is how Vikings taught law. Not through dry legal texts, but through stories about real people in real situations. The neighbour tried to lie, Helga continues. Said he'd bought the sheep from a trader. But Egil had witnesses, and in Viking law witnesses are everything. The neighbour was found guilty, fined 3 times the value of all the sheep he'd stolen, and shamed in front of the whole community. And shame for a Viking is worse than any fine. Ragnhild asked the question that's bothering her. But what if he didn't have witnesses? What if no one saw him mark the sheep? Helga smiles grimly. Then it would have come down to oaths. Each man would swear on his honour that he was telling the truth, and then the community would decide who they believed based on reputation. That's why reputation matters so much. Your word has to be worth something or you have nothing. This is Viking justice in a nutshell. No police, no courts in the modern sense. Just community consensus, witnesses, oaths, and the understanding that your reputation is your most valuable possession. The stories continue through the day. Helga knows hundreds of them, myths about the god sagas, about famous heroes, legends about local families, cautionary tales about people who made bad decisions. She's a walking library, and she knows that when she dies, these stories die with her unless she passes them on. That's the burden of an oral culture. Everything depends on memory. Everything depends on repetition. If no one learns the story, it's gone forever. As afternoon darkens into evening, which happens around 2 in the afternoon this time of year, the mood in the longhouse shifts. People are getting restless, irritable. The walls feel like they're closing in. Tempers are short. Knut and Ragnhild get into an argument about something stupid, who gets to sit closer to the fire maybe. It escalates. Knut shoves her. She shoves back harder. He raises his hand to hit her. Bjorn's voice cuts through the tension like an axe. Enough! They freeze. Outside, Bjorn says. Both of you. Fetch more firewood from the shed. But it's freezing. I know, go anyway. You need to cool down, literally. They bundle up in every piece of clothing they own and struggle to open the door. The cold hits them like a physical blow. They're back inside within 5 minutes, their faces red, their anger completely forgotten, just desperate for warmth. This is what Bjorn knows sometimes. The only cure for cabin fever is a brutal dose of reality. A reminder that however cramped and irritating the Longhouse is, it's paradise compared to being outside in the killing cold. The long evenings are when the best storytelling happens, when the work is done and the children are fed, and everyone's sitting around the fire waiting for sleep that won't come because it's only 5 in the afternoon and your body knows it's not bedtime even though it's dark. That's when Leaf speaks up. Tell the story about how the world ends. There's a pause. Helga looks at him carefully. Ragnarok, you want that one? Yes, I want to understand it. Helga settles back thinking. This is one of the big ones, the story that explains everything, why the world is the way it is, why suffering exists, what happens when everything falls apart. The world ends in fire and ice, she begins. The Fimble winter comes first, 3 years of winter with no summer in between. Snow from every direction, freezing cold that kills everything. The sun and moon are eaten by wolves. The stars fall from the sky. Have you ever sat in the dark in the middle of winter and listened to a story about the world ending in eternal winter? The line between myth and reality gets pretty blurry. The bonds that hold the monsters break, Helga continues. Fenrir the wolf breaks free from his chains. Jormungandr the world serpent rises from the sea. Loki escapes his prison, and they lead an army of giants and the dishonoured dead against the gods. The children are wide-eyed, even the adults are absorbed. The gods fight bravely. Odin faces Fenrir and is swallowed whole. Thor kills the world serpent but dies from its poison. Freyr fights Surtur the fire giant without his magic sword and falls. One by one the gods die, the world burns, the seas swallow the land, everything ends. The silence is heavy, dark, crushing. And then Ragnhild asks the critical question, but then what? Helga smiles. Then the world is reborn. The earth rises from the sea green and fresh. A new sun appears in the sky. A man and a woman who hid in the world tree emerge to repopulate the earth. Some of the gods return, Baldur comes back from the dead, and Odin's sons survive. Life begins again. Different, but still life. This is the genius of Norse mythology. It doesn't promise that things will be okay. It promises that things will end catastrophically and completely, but it also promises that ending isn't final, that after destruction comes renewal, that the cycle continues. For people living through winters that felt like the world ending, this story had real power. The nights blur together. One day is indistinguishable from the next. You wake up, tend the fire, eat a small meal of porridge and dried fish, work on something with your hands, tell stories, eat another small meal, work some more, tell more stories, eventually sleep, wake up and do it all again. The food stores are getting noticeably lower. They're still okay. Astrid calculated well, but there's that subtle shift from we have plenty to we need to be careful. Portions get slightly smaller. The ale gets watered down more. The spacing between meals gets longer. Nobody complains. This is just how it is. You made it through Yule with abundance, and now you pay for that abundance with scarcity. It's the trade-off. It's the cycle. One particularly brutal night when the cold is so intense that even piling everyone together on the sleeping benches isn't enough to stay warm, Astrid makes a decision. She brings out one of the precious barrels of wine from Bjorn's trading voyage. "We're drinking this," she announces. "Tonight." Bjorn looks surprised. "I was saving that for..." For what? For some hypothetical future occasion that might be better than right now. Look around, Bjorn. Everyone is freezing. Everyone in Israel. We need this. We need something to remind us that life has moments of joy, not just endless survival. She's right. And he knows it. They open the barrel. They pour small cups for everyone, even the children get a sip, even the thralls, and they drink this foreign wine, dark and rich and completely unlike anything their daily life contains. It doesn't make them warm, not really, but it makes them feel warm, it makes them smile. It makes them remember that somewhere in the world there are places where people grow grapes in the sun and make wine and live lives that don't involve 6 months of brutal winter. And that reminder, that knowledge that this isn't all there is, that's worth more than saving the wine for later. As Thori agonizingly slowly gives way to Goa the last month of winter, people start to hope again. The days are getting longer incrementally, but noticeably. The sun stays up an extra minute each day. It's not much, but it's something. The conversations shift from pure survival to tentative planning. When the ice breaks, we'll need to repair the fishing weirs. When spring comes, we should expand the barley field. When the snow melts, we need to check the roof for damage. When? Not if. When? That's the difference hope makes. But we're not there yet. Right now, we're still in the deep cold, the dark days, the time when all you can do is hold on and wait and tell stories to remind yourself that spring is a real thing, that actually exists, and will come again. Outside the world is frozen and hostile. Inside the fire burns, the stories continue, the community endures, and very soon now we'll see what happens when the door finally opens and people can step outside into fresh air and sunlight and space. When the world wakes up and the cycle begins all over again, the darkest days are passing. Light is returning. The wheel is turning. Always turning. Something's wrong with the floor. Knut noticed it 3 days ago but didn't say anything. There's a section near the back of the longhouse, close to where the livestock are kept, where the packed earth floor sounds hollow when you step on it. Different from everywhere else, like there's empty space underneath. He's stepped on it maybe 100 times over the winter, but today, maybe because he's bored, maybe because he's curious, maybe because he's 13 and looking for any excuse to investigate something mysterious, he decides to really examine it. He waits until most people are occupied. His father is outside checking on the livestock in their winter shelter. His mother is working the loom with Sina. Leif is repairing tools. Ragnhild and the other children are clustered around Helga listening to another story. Knut kneels down and starts brushing away the loose straw and dirt, and there barely visible is an outline. A wooden trapdoor camouflaged so well you'd never see it if you weren't looking for it. His heart starts racing. This is it. This is the kind of thing he's heard about in sagas. Hidden rooms, secret passages, buried treasure. He glances around to make sure no one's watching. Then he carefully lifts the trapdoor. Below is darkness, and a smell earthy cool, different from the rest of the longhouse. He can see rough wooden steps leading down into what looks like a small underground chamber, a hiding place, a storage space, or maybe something else entirely. Welcome to the parts of the Viking Longhouse that most people never talk about. The hidden aspects, the secret spaces, the things that happened in the shadows and corners and underground places where the official story doesn't quite reach. Let me take you deeper into the reality of living in these structures. The chamber Knut has discovered is called a yardhus, an earth house, and it's more common in Viking Age longhouses than you might think. Archaeological excavations across Iceland, Greenland and mainland Scandinavia have found these underground or semi-underground chambers attached to or hidden beneath longhouses. Their purpose. That's where it gets interesting. Some were clearly storage rooms. The constant cool temperature underground made them perfect for keeping food preserved. Dairy products, salted meat, root vegetables all lasted longer in these earth-cooled chambers than they did in the main longhouse. But some yardhus were something else entirely. Some were escape routes, some were hiding places for valuables during raids, and some, if you believe the sagas, were locations for activities that people didn't want witnesses to. Knut climbs down the steps carefully. The chamber is small, maybe 6 feet by 8 feet, with earthen walls reinforced by wooden planks. The ceiling is low enough that an adult would have to crouch, and in the corner, covered by a piece of oiled cloth, is something that makes his breath catch. Silver. Not a huge hoard, but enough. Maybe 30 or 40 coins, some hack silver jewellery, a few intact arm rings. Hidden here. Secret. Find something interesting. Knut nearly jumps out of his skin. He spins around to find his father standing at the top of the steps, silhouetted against the firelight from the main longhouse. I was just curious. I know. I was 2 at your age. Bjorn climbs down into the chamber, his head brushing the low ceiling. Your grandfather showed me this place when I was about your age. Made me swear never to tell anyone about it unless absolutely necessary. What is it for? Insurance. Bjorn says simply, if raiders come, if the farm is attacked, if everything goes wrong and we need to run this silver stays hidden, it's our emergency reserve, the absolute last resort. Knut looks at the modest pile of silver. It's not much compared to what Bjorn brought back from the trading voyage, but it's hidden here, secret, protected. Does Mama know? Of course, your grandfather told us both, and now you know, but Leif doesn't. Not yet. I was waiting for the right time. Why tell me first? Bjorn considers this. Because you're the one who found it. Because curiosity is a valuable trait if you temper it with discretion. And because you need to understand something, every family has secrets. Every household has hidden spaces. This is just one of them. They climb back up. Bjorn shows Knut how to replace the trapdoor so it's completely invisible again. How to scatter straw and dirt so no one can tell it's been disturbed. How to keep a secret. And then they go back to their daily tasks as if nothing happened. Because that's how secrets work in a longhouse where privacy is impossible. You create it artificially through silence and discretion and simply not talking about certain things. But the Earth's house isn't the only hidden aspect of this longhouse. Let's talk about the spaces that served purposes the sagas barely mention. At the far end of the longhouse there's a small partitioned area that the family refers to as the Dingja, the women's room. It's mentioned in the sagas occasionally, like in Brennu Njal's saga, chapter 44, where it's described as a place where women gathered to do textile work. But it was more than that. It was one of the only spaces in the entire longhouse where women could gather without men present, where they could talk freely, where they could make decisions about things that officially were supposed to be men's decisions. Astrid is in the Dingja now with Sigrid, Helga and Sina. They're working on textile production. Yes, there's always tinning and weaving to be done, but they're also talking, really talking. How are you feeling? Astrid asks Sigrid, glancing at her daughter's belly. She's 4 months pregnant now, starting to show. Tired all the time. Nauseous in the mornings, terrified constantly. That's normal. What if something goes wrong? What if the baby doesn't? Helga interrupts gently. Every woman who's ever had a child has had these exact thoughts. Fear doesn't help. Knowledge does. So let me tell you what to expect. And there, in the dim light of the Dingja, Helga begins teaching Sigrid the things she needs to know. How to recognize the signs of labour, what position to birth in, how to cut the cord, how to tell if the baby is healthy, how to deal with the bleeding afterward, how to manage if things go wrong. This is knowledge that was never written down, never formally recorded. It was passed from woman to woman, mother to daughter, grandmother to granddaughter, in private spaces like this. And if the chain broke, if a woman died before passing on the knowledge that wisdom was lost. Signa the thrall is listening too. She's never had children. As a slave, she's probably been given herbs to prevent pregnancy. Having a thrall give birth would complicate the ownership situation. But she absorbs the information anyway, filing it away for a future that probably won't exist, but might possibly if she ever gains her freedom. The hardest part, Helga says quietly, is after. If the baby dies, if you lose the baby, 1 in 3 doesn't survive the first year. You need to be prepared for that possibility. Sigrid's eyes fill with tears. How do you prepare for that? You don't. You can't. You love them while they're here. You do everything you can to keep them alive. And if the worst happens, you grieve, you honour the loss, and then you keep living because that's what mothers do. This is the hidden emotional labour of Viking women. The constant background anxiety about child mortality, about childbirth mortality, women died in childbirth regularly, about disease accidents, all the ways you could lose the people you love. And they carried it quietly, competently, without complaint, because complaining wouldn't change anything. Later that night, when most people are asleep, there's movement in the shadows near the sleeping benches. Careful, quiet movement. 2 people who aren't supposed to be together finding each other in the darkness. One of the young farmhands, a boy named Ulf, maybe 18, and one of the neighbour's daughters who's been visiting for the past week. They think everyone's asleep. They think no one notices when they slip outside into the bitter cold for 10 minutes of stolen privacy. But Astrid notices. She's lying on her sleeping bench, eyes closed, pretending to sleep. And she notices everything. Does she say something? Does she intervene? These are technically unmarried young people engaging in behaviour that could lead to pregnancy, which could lead to complicated social situations. But they're also young and human, and winter is long and boring, and some degree of this is inevitable. So Astrid makes a calculation she'll talk to the girl's mother later. Quietly. Make sure the girl knows how to make contraceptive tea from tansy and pennyroyal. Make sure if there are consequences they're handled appropriately. This is another secret of the Longhouse. The gap between official morality and practiced reality. The Vikings valued marriage and legitimate heirs, but they also understood that humans are human, that young people will find ways to be together, and that sometimes it's better to manage the situation quietly than to create a public scandal. Archaeological evidence supports this, by the way. DNA analysis of Viking Age remains shows that while most children were born within marriages, there was a not insignificant percentage of children with different paternity than official family records would suggest. People were messier, more complicated, more human than the idealized sagas suggest. The next morning, Bjorn is checking the livestock in their winter shelter, a small building attached to the main longhouse where the most valuable animals are kept during the coldest months. And he notices something that makes his blood run cold. One of the goats is sick, really sick, laboured breathing, discharge from the nose, weakness in the legs. This could be nothing, or it could be the start of an epidemic that kills every animal they have. Livestock disease was one of the great terrors of Viking farming. In close quarters, disease spreads fast. And if your animals die, you lose not just meat and milk and wool, you lose breeding stock. You lose the foundation of your farm's future. Bjorn immediately isolates the sick goat in a separate pen. He'll watch it carefully. If it gets worse, he'll have to make a brutal decision: kill it now before it infects the others, or wait and hope it recovers. These are the kinds of decisions that happen in the shadows. The quiet crises that don't make it into the sagas because they're not dramatic enough. But they're the reality of survival. You notice a problem, you assess the risk, you make a decision, you live with the consequences. The sick goat dies 2 days later. Bjorn kills it mercifully, burns the body to prevent any disease from spreading, and increases the separation between the remaining animals. None of the others show symptoms. This time they got lucky. In another corner of the longhouse, there's a secret of a different kind. The male thrall, Einar, has been carving something. Small wooden figures hidden in his sleeping area, worked on only when he thinks no one's watching. There are beautiful, intricate, little representations of animals, people, mythological creatures. He has real talent. But why hide it? Because in the Viking social order, thralls weren't supposed to have skills beyond basic labour. If Einar reveals that he's an artist, that he has value beyond his muscle, it complicates his position. Maybe it makes him more valuable, harder to sell or trade. Or maybe it makes his masters more determined to keep him enslaved to exploit this skill. So he carves in secret, creates beauty that no one sees, maintains his inner life in a world that wants to reduce him to a tool. Astrid knows about the carvings, she's seen them, and she's made a decision not to say anything, not to acknowledge them, because what would that accomplish? She can't free him, he's too valuable to the farm's operation. She can't reward his skill without creating social complications, so she pretends not to know, lets him have this one secret thing. Is this kindness, or is it just another form of control, letting him think he has privacy, when nothing in this longhouse is truly private? The question haunts her sometimes. As February slowly gives way to early March, as Goa month returns and the cycle prepares to begin again, the longhouse reveals itself as what it truly is. A complex social machine made of secrets and compromises and hidden spaces and unspoken agreements. The earth house holds emergency silver. The Dingja holds women's knowledge. The shadows hold young lovers and private griefs and quiet rebellions. The animal pens hold life or death decisions about disease management. The thrall's sleeping area holds forbidden art. Every family in this longhouse has information they keep from the others. Every person has thoughts they don't voice. Every day contains moments that will never be spoken about, never make it into the official family story. That's okay, that's human. That's how people survive in close quarters without losing their minds entirely. The official story of the Viking Longhouse is about community shared labour collective survival, and that's true. But underneath supporting that official story is a foundation of necessary secrets, of selective privacy, of things better left unsaid. The walls have heard everything, the floor has hidden treasure, the corners have witnessed acts of love and rebellion and quiet desperation. And as the year turns back towards spring, as the door prepares to open again and the cycle begins anew, all these secrets remain, buried, protected, waiting for the next generation to discover them or let them fade into forgotten history. Soon we'll see how this year-long journey completes itself, how the lessons learned, the hardships endured, the secrets kept all come together into a coherent understanding of what it meant to live this life. But first we sit with the secrets, we acknowledge the hidden spaces, we honour the truth that every life, every family, every home contains multitudes that the outside world never sees. The longhouse keeps its secrets, the people keep theirs. Life continues in all its messy, complicated, beautiful, difficult reality. Part 12. The cycle continues. Preparing for the next year. Goa has returned. It's late February again. Almost exactly 1 year since we first stepped into this longhouse. The winter spirits month is here once more, that strange liminal time when winter is dying but spring hasn't quite been born yet. Astrid stands at the edge of the fields where snow is starting to melt in patches, revealing the dark earth beneath. She's 45 now, well, she was 45 a year ago too, but she feels older. A year of managing this farm, this household, these lives has added weight that has nothing to do with birthdays. But she's here. They're all here. They made it through another cycle. Let me tell you what that means. 12 months ago, this family stood on the edge of spring with dwindling food stores and desperate hope. They had to make it through the last brutal weeks of winter. They had to plant at exactly the right time. They had to harvest successfully. They had to slaughter wisely. They had to preserve everything perfectly. They had to ration through another winter. They had to survive disease, accident, raiders, storms, and 1,000 other things that could have killed them. And they did it. Not perfectly, nothing in Viking life is perfect, but they did it. They're still here. That's the victory. Not wealth, not glory, not fame, just still here. Bjorn joins her at the field edge. He's 46 now and he feels it. His back aches more. His hands are stiffer in the mornings. That trading voyage, he said, might be his last. It definitely was. He's passing the leadership to Leif, who's ready, who proved himself capable, who will take his own crew out this coming summer, while Bjorn stays home and manages the farm. Looks like an early thaw. Bjorn observes, watching the meltwater create small streams across the field. 2 weeks earlier than last year, Astrid confirms. We might be able to plant sooner, get a better harvest. Or the frost could come back and kill everything we put in the ground early. She smiles slightly, always the optimist. One of us has to be practical. They stand in comfortable silence watching the land wake up. And here's what they're really watching, the knowledge they've accumulated over a lifetime. The understanding of soil and weather and timing. The wisdom passed down from Bjorn's grandfather to his father to him. The calculations Astrid learned from her mother and grandmother. All of it coming together in this moment of decision about when to start the spring planting. This is what Viking survival actually looked like. Not raids and battles and glory, but this two middle-aged people standing in a muddy field using generations of accumulated knowledge to decide when to put seeds in the ground. Inside the Longhouse, the cycle is repeating in other ways too. Sigrid is here visiting from her husband's farm. She's 7 months pregnant now, belly round and full, moving carefully. She's come to spend time with her mother and grandmother, to learn the things she'll need to know when the baby comes. Helga sits with her in the dinghy. The women's room teaching her about labour and birth. The same lessons Helga taught Astrid 30 years ago. The same lessons Helga's mother taught her 50 years ago. The chain continues link by link, mother to daughter, generation to generation. The pain will be worse than anything you've imagined, Helga says bluntly. She's 71 now, blind in one eye, but her mind is sharp and her knowledge is vital. But it ends. All pain ends eventually one way or another, and if the gods are kind, you'll have a living child at the end of it. And if they are not kind, then you grieve, you honour the loss, and you try again when you're ready. That's what women do. That's what we've always done. This is the knowledge that doesn't make it into the sagas. The women's wisdom passed down in quiet rooms, whispered from mother to daughter. How to birth, how to heal, how to prevent pregnancy when you can't afford another mouth, how to induce it when necessary, how to survive the bleeding, how to recognize infection, how to grieve dead children and keep living anyway. How do you measure the value of this knowledge? How do you calculate what it's worth to have an elder woman who's seen 50 births and knows what's normal and what's deadly, who can say, this is fine, keep pushing, or this is wrong, we need to try something different? You can't. You can only recognize that without this chain of knowledge, everyone dies, the whole culture collapses. So you protect it, you honor it, you make sure the young women learn from the old women over and over, generation after generation. In another corner of the Longhouse, young Knut is teaching his little sister Ragnhild the runes he's learned. She's 8 now, old enough to start her education. He's 14, proud to be the teacher instead of the student. "This one is Fehu," he says, showing her the carved mark that looks like an F. "It means cattle, wealth, prosperity." Why does cattle mean wealth? Because cattle are wealth, dummy. You can eat them, trade them, breed them. What else would wealth be? Ragnhild considers this. She's grown up in a world where silver coins exist, where her father brought back trade goods from foreign lands. But Knut's right at the fundamental level. Wealth is livestock. Wealth is food. Wealth is the things that keep you alive. This is education in the Viking Age. Not formal schools or written textbooks, but older siblings teaching younger ones. Parents teaching children. Elders teaching anyone who will listen. Knowledge transmitted through daily interaction, through doing, through living. And it works. Not perfectly. Plenty gets lost, plenty gets forgotten, but enough survives to keep the culture going. Enough wisdom passes from generation to generation that people know how to farm, how to fish, how to build, how to navigate, how to fight, how to survive. Leif is outside checking the livestock in their winter shelter. He's 21 now and he's changed. That summer voyage, his first real command experience, matured him in ways that are hard to articulate. He saw foreign lands, he made decisions that affected other men's lives. He killed a man in a fight at a trading port. He came back different. He's thinking about this coming summer. He'll be taking his own crew, his own ship. His father will stay home for the first time in decades. It's terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. But right now he's counting goats, making sure they survive the winter, checking for signs of disease, doing the boring, essential work that keeps a farm running. One of the goats is pregnant due to kid in a few weeks. Leif makes a note to watch her carefully to be ready to help if the birth goes badly. He learned this from his father, who learned it from his father. The chain continues. The thralls are still here too. Einar and Sina, 6 years enslaved now. They've survived longer than many thralls do. Most don't last more than a few years under the brutal conditions. But they're still here, still working, still trapped. Einar has stopped carving his secret wooden figures. He hid them so well that even he's forgotten where some of them are. Maybe future archaeologists will find them, these tiny beautiful things made by an enslaved Irish artist, and wonder about the hands that carved them. Signa has accepted that she'll probably never be free. She's 30 years old now. She's survived 6 winters. She's learned enough Norse to communicate. She's become invaluable to Astrid in running the household, and she knows that her value is the very thing that makes her freedom unlikely. Why would they release someone so useful? This is the part of Viking life that we can't romanticize away. The brutality, the injustice, the casual cruelty of slavery. It was woven into the fabric of this society. You can't understand the Vikings without understanding this. You can't celebrate their achievements without acknowledging what those achievements were built on. Both things are true. They were skilled craftsmen and brutal slavers. They were loving parents and casual murderers. They created beautiful poetry and inflicted horrific violence. They were human in all the complicated ways humans are. As evening approaches and the family gathers around the fire for the meal, there's a sense of completion. Not ending the cycle never really ends, but completion of one turn of the wheel. Astrid serves the evening porridge. It's thin, as the stores are low again, as they always are in late winter, but it's there. They have enough. Barely but enough. Bjorn offers the blessing. A few words to Thor, to Freya, to the land spirits. Thanks for survival. Hope for the coming season. The children eat quickly and scatter to their activities. Ragnhild is playing with carved wooden dolls that Einar made for her. He couldn't help himself, couldn't stop creating, even though it's dangerous. Knut is practicing sword movements with the stick, dreaming of the day he'll be old enough to go on trading voyages. The adults sit in comfortable exhaustion. Another day survived, another meal eaten, another night approaching. And Helga the eldest, the keeper of memory, looks around at her family and allows herself a small moment of satisfaction. She's seen 71 winters. She's outlived her husband, 2 of her children, countless friends and neighbours. She's survived famines and diseases and injuries that should have killed her. She's accumulated 7 decades of knowledge about how to live in this harsh world, and she's passing it on to Astrid, to Sigrid, to Knut and Ragnhild, to anyone who will listen. That's her legacy. Not wealth or land or fame, just knowledge, just wisdom, just the understanding of how to survive that she'll pass down so that the next generation doesn't have to learn it all from scratch. "Tell us a story, grandmother," Ragnhild asks, curling up beside the old woman. Helga smiles. "Which one?" "The one about the cycle, about how the world ends and begins again." So Helga tells the story of Ragnarok one more time. The world ending in fire and ice, the gods dying, everything collapsing, and then the rebirth, the new world rising from the sea, life beginning again. It's a story about the cycle, about how nothing is permanent, neither the good nor the bad, about how destruction and creation are 2 sides of the same coin, about how the wheel keeps turning whether you're ready or not. And as she tells it, the family listens. They've heard it before, they'll hear it again. But it matters, the repetition matters. The ritual matters, the shared story that connects them to their ancestors and to each other matters. This is what we've seen over the course of this year. Not the dramatic raids and battles that fill the history books, not the kings and heroes and famous warriors, just this one family in one longhouse surviving 1 year. We've seen them at the end of winter's scarcity rationing the last stores. We've seen the relief of spring, the women pushing the men out the door for space and sanity. We've seen the desperate rush of planting season. We've seen the men leave for trading voyages while the women ran everything. We've seen the exhaustion of harvest. We've seen the heartbreak of slaughter month. We've seen the joy of the men returning. We've seen the defiant celebration of Yule. We've seen the brutal endurance of the coldest months. We've seen the secrets hidden in the walls and beneath the floors. And now we've seen the completion of the cycle, the wheel turning back to where it started. Ready to go around again. What have we learned? We've learned that Viking life was hard. Brutally, exhaustingly, dangerously hard. That survival was never guaranteed, that every season brought new challenges that could kill you if you weren't careful, skilled and lucky. We've learned that the Vikings were human, not superheroes, not cartoon villains, just people trying to survive in a harsh environment with the tools and knowledge they had. We've learned that women were crucial to Viking society in ways the warrior-focused histories often ignore. That they managed farms, made life and death decisions, controlled resources, and held genuine power. We've learned that slavery was fundamental to the Viking economy. That the comfort of some was built on the suffering of others. That we can't celebrate the achievements without acknowledging the cruelty. We've learned that community mattered. That you couldn't survive alone. That the Longhouse was more than a building, it was a system of mutual dependence for better and worse. We've learned that knowledge was transmitted through living, through doing, through the daily interactions of people teaching each other how to survive. And we've learned that the cycle continues. That what happened 1,000 years ago in this Longhouse is still happening now in different forms in different places. People are still surviving. Still teaching their children, still making hard choices, still hoping that spring will come and the harvest will be good and their loved ones will make it through another winter. The wheel keeps turning. As the fire burns low and the family settles onto the sleeping benches for the night, Astrid takes one last look around. at her husband still here despite all the dangers, at her children and grandchild on the way, at her household still functioning, still surviving, at the walls that have sheltered them for another year. She thinks about the spring planting that will start in a few weeks, about Sigrid's baby that will be born in summer, about Leif's voyage and whether he'll come back safe, about another winter to prepare for another cycle to survive. And she thinks, we did it. We made it through. We're still here. That's enough. That has to be enough, because tomorrow, well, not literally tomorrow, but soon the work begins again. The planting, the growing, the harvesting, the slaughtering, the preserving, the enduring. The endless wheel of survival turning one more time. But tonight there's rest. There's fire. There's family. There's the quiet satisfaction of having survived another turn of the wheel. The longhouse settles into sleep, bodies breathing in rhythm, the fire crackling softly. Outside the winter slowly releasing its grip on the land. Spring is coming, it always does. The cycle continues, it always does. And somewhere 1,000 years from now, people will tell stories about the Vikings, about their ships and their raids and their gods and their glory. And some of those stories will be true. But the truest story, the most important story, is this one. The story of people surviving, of families enduring, of knowledge being passed down, of the wheel turning season after season, generation after generation. The story of life itself in all its messy, difficult, beautiful, brutal reality. The longhouse stands, the fire burns, the people sleep, and the cycle continues. Thank you for joining me on this journey through a full year inside a Viking Longhouse. We've lived alongside Bjorn and Astrid Leif and Sigrid Knut and little Ragnhild. We've worked beside Einar and Sina. We've learned from old Helga's wisdom. We've experienced the rhythm of Viking life, not as warriors or explorers, but as farmers, as families, as people just trying to make it through. I hope this journey has shown you something deeper than the usual Viking stories. I hope it's helped you understand that history isn't just kings and battles. It's people living their lives, making hard choices, loving their children, surviving against the odds. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about the past or about survival or about what it means to be human, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Where did you watch this from? What moment hit you hardest? What surprised you most? And please, if you found value in this deep dive into Viking daily life, subscribe to the channel and share this with someone who loves history. There are so many more stories to tell, so many more lives to explore, so many more cycles to witness. The wheel keeps turning, and I'll be here ready to turn it with you. Until next time, remember, we're all just trying to survive our own winters and make it to spring. We're all part of the cycle. We're all connected to these people who lived and died 1,000 years ago, trying to do the same thing we're trying to do. Make it through one more day, one more season, one more year. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next story.